In a forsaken quarter of the metropolis, where antiquated gas lamps barely held their own against an encroaching darkness, stood an anachronistic monument to a bygone era, the train station. Isolated from the bustle of contemporary life, it had become a neglected sanctuary, a vestige of the epoch when iron rails were the sinews that connected society. Cobblestones bore the mark of ceaseless rain, and the iron tracks were tarnished with years of oxidation. Buildings that once stood proudly had succumbed to creeping vines and weather-induced dilapidation. Rain slanted down in torrential rivulets, each drop a metronome ticking toward an ominous future. Thunder rolled across the sky, as though celestial entities were announcing a cosmic verdict. Emerging from the murky shadows of a narrow, winding street was John, his visage that of a man who had waded through 4 decades of life and found himself mired in existential quicksand. His coat, no longer impervious to the elements, sagged with the weight of rainwater. Each step toward the station felt like an act of both desperation and defiance. His eyes, once the windows to youthful aspirations, had dulled to a lusterless gray. An endless cycle of monotony has brought me here. Perhaps boarding a train with no discernible destination is the precise jolt my life needs. To John's considerable surprise, he wasn't alone in this derelict haven. A station master, whose visage bore the creases of countless seasons, occupied the ticket booth. There was an air of expectation in his time-worn eyes, as if he had been awaiting John's arrival with a foreknowledge that defied logical explanation. "Evening," the station master greeted, his eyes twinkling with an enigmatic glint. "The night is inclement, but perhaps you seek passage nonetheless?" "A ticket, please," John mustered, dispelling his initial reservations. "Where exactly does this train lead?" A subdued chuckle escaped the station master's lips. "Ah, the quandary that lures so many aboard. This train, you see, transcends conventional routes. It takes you not where you desire to go, but where you most need to be." An utter absurdity, John considered, even as the compelling, almost hypnotic gaze of the station master began to erode his skepticism. "But my life is already an exercise in absurdity. What more could I lose?" Intrigued enough to embark, the station master probed, already reaching for an elaborately crafted ticket. The paper was unlike any John had seen. Its filigree patterns morphed subtly, almost as though imbued with a life force of their own. "Very well," John replied, resigning himself to this strange escapade and exchanging currency for the ornate ticket. Clutching the enigmatic pass, John made his way up to the platform where anachronism met reality in the form of a locomotive. The train was a paradox, clad in a patina of age, yet possessing an indelible elegance that could not be tarnished by time. It stood regally, yet hauntingly deserted, save for a handful of distant figures. These shadowy passengers remained aloof, ensconced in their own isolated worlds. Upon settling into a seat upholstered in once luxurious velvet, now worn by decades of use, John felt a palpable shift in the air. The ambiance within the carriage was suffused with an aura that defied the natural order, as if the train were not merely a vehicle, but an entity that transcended time and space. Is this the figment of an overactive imagination? Or have I truly ventured into a domain that defies understanding? As the arms of the ancient station clock met at the zenith, the locomotive roared to life. Pistons churned with resonant clangs, steam billowed from the underbelly of the mechanical beast, and the world outside the rain-streaked windows metamorphosed into an ambiguous tableau of fleeting hues. The rigidity of reality seemed to waver, blurring into the abstract. Overcome by a sense of profound disorientation, John could no longer resist the siren call of sleep. He drifted into the netherworld of dreams, oblivious to the metamorphosis that was about to unfold. The train, now emancipated from the earthly plane, ventured into the liminal spaces between dimensions, initiating a journey that defied both logic and imagination. Awakening was a surreal experience, as if John were surfacing from the depths of a fathomless ocean of dreams. His senses felt heightened, yet oddly skewed. The contours of the train's interior had subtly shifted during his repose, now tinged with hues that seemed plucked from a spectrum beyond human perception. The carriage itself exuded an ethereal glow, casting ephemeral shadows that danced on the vintage upholstery. Around him, the other passengers had begun to materialize from their previously indistinct forms. Their visages were a motley collection of antiquated and contemporary styles, as if they hailed from disparate timelines. Conversations reverberated through the train, but the language was elusive, intelligible one moment, incomprehensible the next, as though reality itself were oscillating. John wondered if these passengers were like him, souls caught in existential quagmires, seeking escape or enlightenment. Or perhaps they're denizens of this alternate realm, part of a cosmic tapestry I can't begin to comprehend. His curiosity was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a stewardess pushing a cart laden with an assortment of vials, parchments, and arcane artifacts. Her uniform was a blend of nostalgia and futurism, anachronistic yet harmonious. She offered him a choice of beverages, each contained in elaborately designed glassware. The liquids within shifted in color, effervescing in peculiar rhythms. "Would you like refreshment, sir? We have elixir of recollection, infusion of lucidity, or tonic of transmutation," she inquired, her voice imbued with a melodic quality that transcended vocalization, resonating instead with some deeper aspect of John's consciousness. Feeling adventurous, or perhaps reckless, John opted for the tonic of transmutation. The stewardess poured the iridescent liquid into a goblet adorned with engravings that seemed to narrate an ancient cosmogony. As he took a sip, his senses were flooded with an amalgamation of flavors that defied categorization. A warmth radiated from his core, suffusing his entire being with an inexplicable sense of transformation. Am I becoming an integral part of this dimensional tapestry? Or is it weaving itself into the very fibers of my existence? Just as he was contemplating these thoughts, the train gave a sudden lurch, causing the entire carriage to tremble as though crossing a dimensional fault line. An intercom crackled to life, its message half drowned in static but tinged with an undertone of urgency. "Attention passengers," boomed a voice, layered with resonances that seemed to bypass auditory perception and directly stimulate synaptic responses. "We are approaching the nexus. Please prepare for the synchronic divergence." Nexus? Synchronic divergence? The phrases seemed plucked from a lexicon of metaphysical technobabble, yet they resonated with John's burgeoning awareness of the train's otherworldly nature. As the passengers around him began to chant incantations or manipulate peculiar devices, he sensed a confluence of energies coalescing within the carriage. The exterior landscape, visible through the windows, had dissolved into a vortex of iridescent colors, spiraling into an abyss that seemed to yawn wider with each passing moment. John gripped his seat, bracing himself for an encounter with the unimaginable. As the train plunged into the swirling chasm, the fabric of reality frayed and snapped, propelling John and his fellow passengers into a realm governed by laws arcane and paradoxical. What awaited them was a dimension uncharted by terrestrial minds, a world unfettered by the boundaries of human comprehension. And thus, John found himself unmoored from the plane of his banal existence, sailing into a cosmic ocean fraught with both peril and promise. As the disorienting whirlpool of light and color gave way to newfound stability, John found himself staring out at a landscape almost poetic in its alien majesty. The horizon was marked by vast fields of crystalline flora, illuminated by a celestial body that defied earthly descriptions, neither sun nor moon, but something that emitted a softer luminescence, painting the world in shades of twilight. The train had come to rest in a station, if it could be called that, constructed from materials that shimmered with an otherworldly gleam. The architectural design suggested an advanced civilization, a blend of geometry and artistry that struck a harmonious balance between form and function. Have I transcended the limits of reality to find myself in some cosmic haven? Or is this yet another elaborate mirage, a reflection of my innermost desires and fears? Upon disembarking, John felt a curious lightness in his step, as if the laws of physics had been recalibrated in this dimension. The air was imbued with a fragrance both exotic and invigorating, and he sensed a vitality coursing through his veins, rejuvenating his weary spirit. His reverie was broken by a procession of beings advancing toward the train. They were humanoid, but distinctly different, with elongated features and iridescent eyes that regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. One among them, garbed in opalescent robes that flowed like liquid light, stepped forward as the group's apparent emissary. "Welcome, traveler, to Eidolon," the being intoned, its voice echoing as if carried by the wind itself. "I am Seraphis, the harbinger of this sanctuary. You stand at the confluence of realities, a crossroads of potentialities." Though John's mind raced with questions, a newfound equanimity curtailed his impulsivity. Instead, he breathed deeply, feeling an inexplicable connection to Seraphis and the realm he now found himself in. "Sanctuary for whom? And why have I been brought here?" John inquired, navigating the fine line between awe and inquiry. Seraphis gestured grandly toward the sweeping vistas beyond the platform. "Eidolon is a haven for souls adrift, a crucible for metamorphosis. Each being here, be they from realms known or unfathomable, has undertaken a voyage towards self-discovery. As for why you are here, that is a question only you can answer, John. Is this the culmination of my existence, a grand cosmic epiphany, or merely a trial, a tribulation designed to challenge the boundaries of my identity?" Seraphis handed John a pendant imbued with intricate sigils. "This talisman will guide you through your journey in Eidolon. It resonates with the quintessence of your being, a compass that will lead you where you most need to go." Accepting the pendant, John felt an invigorating jolt, as though his existential GPS had been recalibrated. He looked back at the train, now an artifact from another reality, its role as a cosmic vessel superseded by the mysteries that Eidolon held. As he took his first steps into the unknown, following the ethereal pulse of the talisman, John realized that his arrival in Eidolon was not an end, but a beginning. Here, in a realm unbound by the constraints of conventional wisdom, he could confront the specters of his past and, perhaps, find the inspiration to reshape his future. Guided by the talisman's pulse, a subtle vibration synchronized with the rhythm of his heartbeat, John ventured deeper into the crystalline landscape. The air hummed with an almost musical resonance, a sonic texture that seemed to communicate with the essence of his soul. An expanse of luminous water stretched before him, its surface undulating in complex patterns, as if inscribing the very equations of existence. Is this realm a physical place, or a manifestation of collective consciousness? A landscape wrought from the dreams and nightmares of untold dimensions? He was interrupted by a sudden change in the talisman's behavior. It pulsated more rapidly, its vibrations crescendoing in a harmonious chord that reverberated through his being. Ahead, a grand structure materialized, temple-like in its grandiosity. Built from a substance resembling both stone and crystal, existing in a state of perpetual flux. Crossing the threshold, John entered a chamber bathed in iridescent light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Arrayed before him were 7 beings, each distinctive yet sharing the ethereal qualities of Seraphis. They were the oracles of Eidolon, stewards of wisdom, and guardians of the realm's myriad secrets. "Ah, the newcomer," the central oracle intoned, her voice imbued with an ancient, motherly warmth. "We have been expecting you, John. You may pose one question, a query whose answer could illuminate your path or shroud it in further mystery. An opportunity to peel back the veils of uncertainty, to glean knowledge that could reshape my understanding of not just Eidolon, but existence itself." John pondered his options, conscious of the weight his inquiry would bear. After a moment that felt like an eternity compressed into a heartbeat, he spoke. "What is the purpose of my journey through Eidolon?" The oracles exchanged enigmatic glances, as though communing through an inscrutable telepathy. Finally, the central oracle responded. "Purpose is an ever-changing tapestry, woven from the threads of choices and consequences. Your journey serves as both a catalyst and a crucible, transforming not only you, but the very essence of Eidolon. The realm thrives on the amalgamation of perspectives, the synergy of souls that traverse its lands." The oracle extended her hand, from which emanated a radiant sphere resembling a miniature eclipse. "This is a fragment of potentiality. Imbue it with your essence, and it will transform into a key, unlocking a domain within Eidolon where your purpose shall become manifest. Is this a gift or a challenge? A privilege or a burden?" John touched the fragment, feeling his very DNA resonate with the cosmic artifact. it morphed into a complex key, its geometry a labyrinth of interlocking vectors and polyhedra. "Seek the eclipse spire, where the celestial cycles of Eidolon converge," said the oracle. "There, you shall find the lock that this key opens, and confront the apotheosis or nadir of your sojourn." Taking leave of the oracles, John felt both exalted and daunted. As he exited the temple, the talisman began pulsating again, now in synchrony with the key. He knew his next destination, the eclipse spire, a structure whispered to exist at the confluence of Eidolon's celestial mechanics, where the potentialities of one's journey would be laid bare. He was a man transformed yet again, moving closer to an understanding so profound it defied verbal articulation. Ahead lay the penultimate chapter of his cosmic odyssey, one that promised enlightenment or enigma. With each step toward the eclipse spire, John felt the fabric of Eidolon tremble, as if acknowledging the gravity of his impending arrival. The spire loomed like an astronomical wonder, its architecture a harmony of sacred geometry and cosmic artistry. As he approached, the key resonated, its form oscillating in tune with the vibrations of the talisman and the pulse of the realm itself. Is this the climax of my odyssey? A grand denouement that will either shatter or validate my understanding of existence? He inserted the key into an intricate lock that appeared to form organically from the spire's surface. As he turned it, the world around him quaked, the boundaries between physical and metaphysical blurring in a kaleidoscope of existential revision. The spire opened, revealing an interior that defied comprehension, simultaneously an observatory, a cathedral, and a vortex into the unfathomable. Positioned at the center was an altar upon which lay a mirror, but not an ordinary one. It was a gateway to myriad realities, an aperture through which John glimpsed versions of himself across parallel dimensions. Lives unchosen, paths untaken. Each reflection shimmered with the allure and anguish of what could have been. Is this my purpose, then? To bear witness to the multiplicity of my own existence? To grasp the elusive tapestry of choice and fate? At that moment, the celestial body that had illuminated Eidolon since his arrival began its approach toward what appeared to be a moon, or perhaps another celestial being. The eclipse was beginning. "Behold the convergence," a voice echoed through the chamber, a confluence of Seraphis and the oracles, their tones harmonized into a spectral choir. Every cycle, the eclipse offers a choice: to remain in Eidolon as a steward of its mysteries, or to return to your original realm, forever changed, but gifted with newfound wisdom. John pondered the magnitude of his decision, grappling with the allure of the unknown against the call of the familiar. What meaning will I extract from this ephemeral existence? What purpose will guide me henceforth? As the celestial bodies aligned in a mesmerizing spectacle of astral majesty, John felt his decision crystallize. He chose to return, to carry the wisdom gleaned from his journey back to his earthly existence. It wasn't escape he sought anymore, but transformation, a metamorphosis born from his voyage through the enigmatic tapestry of Eidolon. As he made his choice, the mirror transformed into a portal, shimmering with the soft light of his home dimension. He stepped through, each footfall a leap across realities, until he found himself back on Earth, or what he once knew as Earth. The realm seemed both alien and familiar, a world laden with opportunities for rebirth and renewal. As he disembarked from the now corporeal train, John glanced back. No longer a spectral locomotive, it had resumed its mundane form. Yet it could not disguise its role as the vessel of his cosmic pilgrimage. John had returned, but he was no longer the man who had boarded that fateful train. He was an amalgam of experiences and revelations, a sentient being forever marked by his sojourn through Eidolon. And as he ventured into the world, talisman and key tucked away as mementos of his extraordinary expedition, he did so with an unquenchable thirst for understanding, perpetually seeking the profound and the prosaic, forever journeying, even if only in spirit, through dimensions seen and unseen. I had barely settled in after my encounter with the chupacabra when the faded brown envelope appeared on my porch. It bore no return address, just my name, written in a meticulous, almost shaky hand. Lucas Moore. Peeling it open, I found a photograph. It displayed an unsettling scarecrow surrounded by wilted corn, with the barest hint of a shadowy figure behind it. I could almost feel the dry, whispering breeze of that desolate field. Scribbled on the back were the words, "Kansas awaits. Save us." The town of Eldridge, Kansas wasn't much to look at. Weathered signs and old brick buildings lined its quiet streets. As I drove through, heads turned, faces peered from behind curtains, and murmured conversations stopped. Eldridge felt like a town with a heavy burden. I booked a room at the only inn in town. The innkeeper, Mrs. Marsh, a woman with lines deep enough to tell tales of their own, gave me a scrutinizing look. "You're not from around here, are you?" she inquired, her voice a raspy whisper. "Just passing through," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Heard there were some interesting stories in these parts." Mrs. Marsh hesitated, her eyes darting to the photograph in my hand, which I had unintentionally left exposed. "Some tales are better left untold, Mr. Moore." And with that, she handed me my key. That night, the image of the scarecrow haunted my dreams, leading me further into the mysteries of Eldridge and the heart of the fields that lay just beyond. The morning sun cast golden beams through the sheer curtains of my room, pulling me from the grips of uneasy dreams. With the haunting image of the scarecrow still etched in my mind, I decided to start my investigation where most locals would gather, the town's pub. The worn wooden sign outside read Eldridge Tavern. Inside, the scent of aged oak mixed with whispers of forgotten conversations. As I approached the bar, the bartender, a sturdy man with a grizzled beard and sharp eyes, sized me up. "What can I do for you, stranger?" "Something strong," I replied, "and perhaps a bit of local lore to go with it." A low chuckle rumbled from a corner table where a group of elders sat. One of them, a frail gentleman with a silvery mane, beckoned me over. "You wish to hear about the scarecrow?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. As the hours flowed, so did the tales. The scarecrow, they said, had stood in those fields long before most of them were born. It had once been a man named Josiah Crane, a hard-working farmer, but one fateful evening, he was accused of a heinous act. The town's swift justice saw him hanged in his own cornfield. With his last breath, he cursed the town and all who resided in it. One of the women, her fingers adorned with multiple rings, added, "Every harvest moon, he returns, seeking vengeance. It ain't just some tale. My own great aunt vanished one such night." The stories varied, but a common thread remained. The scarecrow's victims weren't random. They all shared lineage with the accusers of Josiah Crane. Intrigued, I decided to delve deeper. The local library was my next stop, where I hoped to find more concrete information. The librarian, Clara, a young woman with a penchant for history, became an unexpected ally. "The town records have always been a bit selective about what they include," she said, pulling out dusty volumes from a restricted section. Together, we scoured through pages, piecing together the puzzle of the sinister scarecrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I returned to the inn, armed with knowledge and more questions. The weight of the stories, the records, and the ominous fields in the distance pressed upon me. Tonight, I resolved, I would step into the heart of the maze and confront the legend itself. The darkness in Eldridge was unlike any I'd ever seen. It was thick, almost palpable, as though the very night had soaked up decades of fear from the townsfolk. Guided only by the dim glow of my lantern, I made my way to the sprawling cornfields, the whispers of the town echoing in my ears. Each stalk stood tall and foreboding, creating a labyrinth that threatened to swallow me whole. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves, but every so often, a whisper seemed to weave its way through the wind, making it difficult to discern natural sounds from my heightened imagination. As I ventured deeper, the illusions began. Faint, playful laughter of children seemed to dance on the breeze. But when I'd turn, there would be nothing. Once, a shadowy figure darted just out of my peripheral vision. Was it Josiah, or just a trick of the light? I finally came upon the scarecrow. It was eerily still, a sentinel in ragged clothes. It looked ordinary, lifeless. But as I studied it, the memories of the tales I'd heard caused an involuntary shiver down my spine. Determined to confront this entity, I planted myself a distance away, setting a few traps around the area based on my previous hunts. I took out a small bell from my bag, tying it to the scarecrow's arm, a makeshift alarm for when it decided to awaken. Hours seemed to blend as I waited in the chilling silence, my senses on high alert. Every sway of the corn, every distant hoot of an owl, kept me on edge. And just as the doubt began to creep in, just as I thought the legends were nothing more than exaggerated tales, the bell began to ring. It started softly, almost hesitantly, but quickly grew into a frantic jangle. The scarecrow, once slouched and lifeless, was now upright, its head tilting slightly, as if sniffing the night air. Gripping my lantern tighter, I steeled myself for what lay ahead, realizing that the tales barely scratched the surface of the enigma that was the sinister scarecrow of Eldridge. The jangle of the bell became a frenzied anthem, a signal heralding the scarecrow's awakening. My heart raced as it began to move, not with the creaky awkwardness of an inanimate object, but with an eerie fluidity that betrayed a dark intelligence. The moonlight, in its cruel clarity, revealed the scarecrow's eyes, no longer dull, but glowing with a malicious red light. It fixed its gaze on me, its intentions clear. This wasn't just a mere guardian of crops, it was a hunter, and tonight, I was its prey. The game of cat and mouse began. The scarecrow lunged, and with every ounce of my being focused on survival, I dodged. Each time it came close, the sheer cold emanating from it sent shivers cascading down my spine. I had to rely on every skill I'd honed from previous hunts. I lured it towards one of the traps, a net which sprung up, but the scarecrow tore through it with shocking strength. I remembered the locket I had found, clutching it in my hand. As the scarecrow closed in, I held it out, hoping it might recognize it and hesitate. For a split second, it did, its burning eyes flickering with a hint of human emotion. But the moment was fleeting. The chase led me back to the scarecrow's original post. As I neared it, I stumbled upon a patch of soft earth. Frantically, I began to dig, intuition guiding me. My fingers brushed against something solid, a small wooden box, decayed with age. Inside, I found letters, heartfelt notes exchanged between Josiah and the young woman from the photograph. Their love, pure and tragic, was detailed in ink. As the scarecrow approached, its eyes still burning but its steps more hesitant, I began to read the letters aloud. With each word, the entity seemed to wrestle with itself, torn between its need for vengeance and the memories of its past life. By the time dawn's first light broke, the scarecrow, exhausted from the internal struggle, collapsed, returning to its dormant state. I stood there, letters in hand, surrounded by the silent cornfields, pondering the true nature of the beast and the man it once was. The town's dark history had birthed this entity, and it was now up to me to lay its tortured soul to rest. The rising sun painted the horizon in warm hues, the golden rays bringing life to the land but also revealing the horrors of the night before. In the clear light of day, the scarecrow lay lifeless once more, a mere silhouette of the terror it had become under the moon's reign. The wind had softened, carrying with it the hushed whispers of a town still asleep, oblivious to the night's showdown. Exhausted, I made my way back to Eldridge, the bundle of letters clutched tightly in my grasp. Their aged pages, yellowed and frayed, held secrets and truths that had been buried for far too long. Clara was waiting for me at the library's entrance. Her usually composed demeanor was replaced with evident concern. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling, "I did some more digging after you left. I found something you need to see." She ushered me inside, revealing a tapestry of old town photographs spread out on a table. Central to them all was a picture of the town's founders, and there, unmistakably, was the young woman from the locket. "This is Eliza," Clara whispered, pointing to her. She was to be wed to one of the town's leading figures, but she fell in love with Josiah. Their affair was the scandal of its time. When she became pregnant, the town's elite saw it as a blight on their honor. The pieces began to connect in my mind. Eliza's betrothed, fueled by rage and jealousy, must have orchestrated the false accusations against Josiah. The town, either complicit or deceived, had hung an innocent man, sparking the curse that would plague them for generations. We decided to present our findings to the town. The town hall, a grandiose building with tall windows and carved wooden doors, quickly filled with residents, their murmurs echoing through the chamber. Laying out the photographs and letters for all to see, I narrated the tragic tale of Josiah and Eliza, the love they shared, and the grave injustice that birthed the sinister scarecrow. The room grew heavy with a mix of shock, denial, and sorrow. Generations of Eldridge residents had been haunted, not by a malevolent spirit, but by a grieving soul seeking justice. The town's elder, a regal woman named Mrs. Hawthorne, rose from her seat. Her voice, although shaky, carried a weight of authority. "We cannot change the past," she began, "but we must make amends. We owe it to Josiah, to Eliza, and to every soul that's been lost." A memorial was erected in Josiah's honor on the very spot he was unjustly hanged. The town came together, each person contributing in their own way. They gave Josiah a proper burial, placing the locket, the symbol of his lost love, upon his grave. As the sun set, casting a warm glow on the town, the air felt different, lighter. The scarecrow's reign of terror had ended, not through violence or exorcism, but through understanding and justice. I left Eldridge the next morning, the weight of the locket replaced by the weight of the story I now carried with me. As my car pulled away, the rearview mirror offered one last glance at the town, its fields now serene and its secrets laid bare. The road ahead was long, but my journey as a hunter was far from over. With each case, I was reminded that sometimes the most haunting monsters were not born of myth or legend, but of human actions and their reverberations through time. The deafening roar of machinery was my daily soundtrack, the familiar rattling and grinding of the packaging plant. I moved through my workday in a comfortable daze, disengaged from the chaos around me. Another shift done, another day closer to retirement, until in an instant my world collapsed. A loud bang, screams, searing pain, and when I regained foggy awareness, my legs were gone. Crushed beyond salvation in an industrial accident, reduced to mangled flesh and splintered bone. Phrases filtered through the medicated haze those first days in the hospital. Amputation, medical leave, workers' comp, and of course, that innocuous-sounding term, phantom pain, used to describe the fiery agony flaring through my missing limbs. At home, navigating a ground-floor apartment refitted for my new reality, I clung to the promise that the pain was temporary. But the sleek prosthetics attached below my knees felt alien and unnatural. The ghostly presence of my severed legs persisted, their phantom impressions twitching with distorted nerve signals. Over weeks of restless, dream-filled nights, the first signs of strangeness appeared. Flickering lights, barely heard whispers, objects shifting untouched. I dismissed it as stress, my mind playing tricks in the shadowy spaces between wakefulness and sleep. Until the night. I startled awake and felt the unmistakable sensation of footsteps, the flecks of muscle and bone no longer there. I listened, heart pounding and breath shallow, as the disembodied steps moved slowly around my bed before fading away. In the light of day, seized by a desperate need for answers, I researched the history of my apartment. The previous resident had been an occult scholar and researcher named Elias Locke, who reportedly vanished under mysterious circumstances. In a neglected closet, I discovered the remnants of Locke's esoteric library, arcane tomes filled with strange symbols and dire spiritual warnings. You're grasping for meaning where there is none, I told myself. But deep down, my fears seemed less far-fetched with each new incident. Had I also inherited Locke's unfinished business with the world beyond the veil? Feeling increasingly unmoored, I reached out to Dr. Catherine Redwood, a parapsychologist known for her pioneering research on trauma and paranormal phenomena. She listened gravely as I described the disembodied footsteps, objects moving untouched, the vivid phantom pain. "You are not alone in this," she said, "but I urge you not to ignore what's happening. These phenomena can gather strength if left unchecked." She taught me words of power, an incantation to sever paranormal connections. "Just a precaution," she assured me, but her eyes held an urgency that betrayed her stoic manner. I clung to the lifeline of Dr. Redwood's help, fortifying myself for whatever lay ahead. But some primal, instinctual part of me sensed the worst was yet to come. The night arrived as I feared it would, bringing with it a violent tearing of the veil between this world and the unknown. As I lay paralyzed in bed, my phantom legs twitched and moved of their own volition, puppeteered by an unseen intelligence. My surroundings warped sickeningly, the room stretching into impossible shapes and dimensions. Then, I was wrenched into a lightless, cavernous void, utterly alone save for a lingering sense of being watched. From the shadows, it took form, an entity, humanoid but flickering, like a projection on the verge of failure. When it spoke, the sound was devoid of humanity. "I am a soul caught between worlds, neither living nor dead," it rasped, "and you are a body rendered incomplete. Together, we can be made whole." Tendrils of icy terror snaked through me. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a strangled gasp emerged. I was utterly defenseless against this spectral intruder. But as the entity drifted closer, that small core of defiance within me awoke. I forced myself to focus, recalling Dr. Redwood's words of power. Though my voice shook, I began the incantation. The specter recoiled with an ear-piercing shriek, its body fracturing like a monstrous mirror. It clawed desperately toward me but continued disintegrating until only swirling dust remained. With a gut-wrenching lurch, I snapped back into my bedroom, every nerve alive with shock. After that night, the uncanny occurrences ceased, leaving only questions that science could not yet answer. In the following years, I devoted myself to studying the intersection between the physical and paranormal realms, seeking insights that might help others caught in that perilous divide between worlds. My path was forged by pivotal loss and irreversible transformation. But I move forward now on steady footing, knowing there are always those who will help light the way forward, even through the darkest shadows. Dr. Emily Lawson had always been drawn to the mysteries of radiation. Her life's work had led her to the heart of darkness, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. While the world had moved on from the nuclear disaster, she couldn't tear herself away from its lingering secrets. The team of researchers, all clad in hazmat suits, bustled around the makeshift camp near the decaying reactor. Their equipment hummed with precision, and the Geiger counters clicked rhythmically, measuring the radiation levels in the air. Dangerous work, but they thrived on the edge of the unknown. The morning sun cast an eerie glow over the desolate landscape, painting the sky in hues of pale orange and gray. Emily focused on her research, meticulously examining the effects of radiation on local plant life. Each step sent clouds of dust swirling into the still, tainted air. With care, she reached for a particularly mutated specimen of flora. Its leaves were grotesque, twisted shapes, shimmering with an unnatural bioluminescence. As her gloved hand brushed against a hidden lever on a partially buried metal box, it gave way with a rusty groan, causing the ground to tremble beneath her. A low rumble echoed through the earth as a dark, foreboding chasm cracked open before her. Panicking, Emily tried to back away but lost her footing and tumbled backward, landing hard against a jagged outcrop of concrete. Her hazmat suit protected her from the immediate dangers of the radioactive environment, but her heart raced with fear. From the gaping maw in the earth, something emerged. Something she had never seen before. It moved with a sinuous grace, its elongated limbs and grotesque features sending shivers down her spine. Its skin pulsed with a sickly green glow, a sign of its intimate connection to the radiation that permeated the zone. The creature turned its eerie, glowing eyes toward her, swaying its head from side to side as if studying her with morbid curiosity. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and her gloved hands trembled as she fumbled for her radio, desperately calling for her team. She knew they were all in grave danger and needed to respond swiftly. The creature took a slow, deliberate step closer, its movements fluid and unnatural. Emily's voice quivered as she shouted into the radio, "Emergency! We've released something. Something terrible. Get here now." Hope mingled with doubt as she prayed that her message reached her team in time. As the mutated horror advanced, Emily realized she had unwittingly unleashed a nightmare, a living embodiment of the very radiation she had devoted her life to studying. This was no ordinary discovery. It was a horrifying truth brought to life by the forces she had dedicated herself to understanding. The world around her seemed to blur as she continued to call for help, and the creature drew closer, its malevolence suffocating. Chernobyl's secrets had come alive, and Emily and her team were now faced with an inescapable reality. Some mysteries should remain buried. The creature's growth was exponential, fueled by the radiation it devoured. In mere hours, it had transformed from a grotesque anomaly into a nightmarish behemoth. Its once sinuous form had become a hulking monstrosity that tore through the Chernobyl wilderness with ease. Each step it took sent shockwaves through the earth, leaving behind a trail of destruction. The creature's grotesque limbs, now massive and powerful, smashed through the remnants of abandoned buildings and shattered trees as if they were mere twigs. Its skin pulsed with an eerie, pulsating green, casting an eerie glow across the landscape. It seemed unstoppable, a true abomination born of radiation. As the mutated horror rampaged through the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the few inhabitants who had dared to live in the shadow of the disaster found themselves facing an unimaginable nightmare. Those who had managed to survive in this desolate place now had to confront a force beyond their worst nightmares. Terrified residents huddled in the crumbling remains of their homes, their lives shattered once again by the lingering horrors of Chernobyl. The walls of their dilapidated houses provided scant protection as the creature's monstrous appendages tore through them like tissue paper. The air was thick with dust and debris, and the stench of decay mingled with the acrid smell of radiation. Desperate cries echoed through the eerie silence as they sought refuge from the approaching catastrophe. Children clung to their parents, their innocent eyes filled with fear, while the elderly recounted tales of the disaster they thought they had left behind. Frantic prayers were whispered to a god who had long ago abandoned this forsaken land. Amid the chaos, the once diminished population now faced an unrelenting terror that eclipsed even the haunting memories of Chernobyl's past. Their survival instincts kicked into overdrive, driving them to make desperate attempts to escape the creature's inexorable advance. Some fled into the treacherous wilderness, hoping to find safety beyond the irradiated borders of the exclusion zone, while others remained trapped, their fates uncertain. Abandoned pets and wildlife scattered in all directions, fleeing the creature's monstrous presence. The once silent woods now resounded with the cacophony of chaos, a symphony of fear and despair. Amid the chaos and destruction, Dr. Emily Lawson knew she had to act quickly. Her radio crackled with static as she attempted to contact the team of specialists she had reached out to earlier. And she explained the urgency of the situation, her voice filled with a mix of desperation and determination. "Come quickly," she pleaded into the radio, her words laced with urgency. "We've unleashed a monstrosity, and it's growing stronger with every moment. The entire exclusion zone is in peril. We need your expertise to contain it before it's too late." Emily hoped her message reached the specialists in time. They were her last hope in the face of this radioactive horror. As she awaited their arrival, she couldn't help but wonder if they were prepared for the nightmarish reality they were about to confront. Dr. Emily Lawson's urgent call for help reached the ears of specialists who were no strangers to dealing with the anomalous and the monstrous. They arrived in Chernobyl one by one, each with a unique set of skills and specialized equipment. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the brilliant geneticist, was the first to arrive. His plane touched down on a makeshift landing strip carved from the desolate landscape. He stepped onto the cracked tarmac, adjusting his glasses as he surveyed the grim surroundings. His reputation for unraveling the mysteries of mutated organisms preceded him. As he made his way toward Emily Lawson, his eyes held a mixture of curiosity and determination. Next to arrive was Sarah Turner, a fearless field biologist renowned for her work in cryptobiology. She had faced creatures previously believed to exist only in myths and legends. Sarah carried a tranquilizer rifle slung over her shoulder, ready to sedate the creature should the need arise. Her calm demeanor and piercing blue eyes hinted at the unwavering resolve that had earned her respect in the world of the paranormal. The team was further bolstered by the arrival of Dr. Robert Clark, a physicist and expert in radiation manipulation. He descended from a helicopter that had been specially modified for the mission, clutching a device of his own design. This device emitted intense bursts of radiation capable of weakening the creature temporarily. Robert's steady demeanor reassured the others that they had a fighting chance against the unnatural threat. Lastly, Natalia Petrova, a former military operative with a reputation for unwavering courage in the face of danger, touched down on another helicopter. She brought an arsenal of high-powered weaponry and combat expertise, a reassuring presence in a land where danger lurked at every corner. Her piercing gaze swept over the bleak landscape, and her hands rested confidently on her weapons. Together, they formed a team with a diverse range of skills and a shared determination to confront the horrors unleashed by the mutated creature. As they gathered under the ominous shadow of Chernobyl's decaying reactor, they knew that their success depended on their collective expertise and unwavering resolve. Under the shadow of Chernobyl's decaying reactor, the specialized team gathered to strategize. The air was heavy with the weight of their mission, and the distant roars of the creature served as a constant reminder of the threat they faced. Emily, clad in her hazmat suit, took charge. Her voice carried a resolute tone. "We need a plan to track and contain this creature. Time is our enemy, and it's growing stronger with every moment." Her team members, their faces obscured by their protective gear, nodded in agreement. Dr. Sterling, the geneticist, suggested, "Our first step should be to understand the creature's biology and vulnerabilities. I'll analyze tissue samples from its previous encounters to determine its weaknesses." Sarah Turner, the field biologist, added, "We should also map out its recent movements. We may find patterns that help us anticipate its next location." Dr. Clark, the physicist, chimed in, "I can use my radiation-emitting device to weaken the creature temporarily. It could give us an edge in a confrontation." Natalia Petrova, the former military operative, her gaze unwavering, said, "And I'll be the first line of defense. We need to be prepared for anything. I'll make sure we're armed and ready." Their plan was set in motion, a fragile hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The team members, their expertise diverse and complementary, shared a common purpose: to confront the mutated horror and contain the threat it posed to the exclusion zone and beyond. With their plan in place, the team embarked on a relentless pursuit of the creature. Their journey took them through the haunting landscapes of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where nature had reclaimed the remnants of human civilization. Crumbling buildings and desolate streets bore witness to the disaster's enduring legacy. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant echoes of the creature's roars. Each step they took seemed to resonate with the weight of history and the horrors that had transpired in this forsaken place. As they closed in on their quarry, a palpable sense of dread settled over them. They found themselves standing at the edge of a vast, overgrown forest where the creature had taken refuge. The trees whispered unsettling secrets, their gnarled branches forming an ominous canopy overhead. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the creature burst forth from the underbrush with a bone-chilling roar. Its monstrous form filled the clearing, casting a sinister shadow over the team. Its green-tinged skin pulsed with malevolence, and its glowing eyes locked onto its pursuers. The pursuit had escalated into a high-stakes confrontation, where survival was far from guaranteed. With weapons at the ready and a plan formed in desperation, the team braced themselves for a battle that would determine the fate of Chernobyl and the world beyond. Inside their makeshift base in the heart of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the specialized team gathered around a cluttered table strewn with charts, maps, and scientific instruments. It was time to delve deep into the mysteries of the creature that had become their relentless adversary. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the geneticist, meticulously examined tissue samples taken from the creature's previous encounters. His laboratory equipment hummed with precision as he analyzed the genetic code of the mutated horror. He muttered to himself, deciphering the creature's biological anomalies. Sarah Turner, the field biologist, pored over her field notes, mapping out the creature's recent movements. She sought to identify patterns that might reveal its next target. Her fingers traced lines on a map, connecting the dots of destruction left in the creature's wake. Dr. Robert Clark, the physicist, calibrated his radiation-emitting device, fine-tuning its settings. He knew that precise control of radiation was their key to weakening the creature temporarily. His calculations were critical to the success of their plan. Natalia Petrova, the former military operative, stood guard at the entrance, her trained eyes scanning the perimeter for any signs of danger. Her combat readiness was a constant reminder that their enemy was relentless, and their margin for error was razor-thin. Hour after hour, the team pored over data, exchanged theories, and debated strategies. They sought to better understand the creature's biology and weaknesses, knowing that knowledge was their most potent weapon. As days turned into nights, the mutated horror continued to grow stronger. Its rampage through the Chernobyl exclusion zone left a trail of devastation in its wake. The team faced a harrowing dilemma: whether to risk a dangerous tactic to stop the creature or face the potential consequences of inaction. Dr. Sterling, after hours of analysis, spoke with a tone of urgency. "We've identified a potential vulnerability. The creature's rapid growth is dependent on a specific organ that absorbs radiation. If we can target and disrupt this organ, we might be able to slow its growth," Dr. Clark added. "But doing so will require getting dangerously close to the creature. And even if we succeed, we'll need to act quickly to contain it before it regenerates." Natalia Petrova, her gaze unwavering, declared, "We can't let fear paralyze us. We came here to stop this thing, and that's what we'll do. But we must be prepared for a high-stakes battle." The team, armed with their expertise and specialized equipment, ventured into the heart of the Chernobyl wilderness. The air was tense with anticipation as they approached the creature's lair, their hearts pounding in unison. They had one chance to execute their plan. Dr. Sterling and Dr. Clark worked in tandem, deploying the radiation-emitting device with surgical precision. It emitted intense bursts of radiation, targeting the creature's vulnerable organ. The mutated horror roared in pain and fury, its once green skin darkening as its growth slowed. Sarah Turner stood ready with her tranquilizer rifle, prepared to immobilize the creature should their plan succeed. But the battle was far from over. The creature, weakened but far from defeated, lashed out with a ferocity that defied its size. Natalia Petrova, the team's first line of defense, engaged in a high-stakes firefight with the creature, her bullets finding their mark on its grotesque form. Amid the chaos and carnage, the team fought desperately to subdue the creature. Dr. Sterling and Dr. Clark struggled to maintain control over the radiation-emitting device, knowing that one misstep could spell disaster. The outcome of this climactic battle would determine the fate of the Chernobyl exclusion zone and the world beyond. With their lives, and the lives of countless others hanging in the balance, the specialized team steeled themselves for a final, high-stakes showdown against the relentless abomination born of radiation. The final confrontation unfolded beneath the looming shadow of Chernobyl's decaying reactor. The specialized team, with hearts filled with determination and fear, faced the mutated horror in a last-ditch effort to defeat it. Dr. Marcus Sterling and Dr. Robert Clark worked tirelessly to maintain control over the radiation-emitting device. It emitted relentless bursts of radiation, sapping the creature's strength. Sarah Turner, her tranquilizer rifle at the ready, aimed for the creature's weakened organ. Natalia Petrova, her combat instincts honed to perfection, fought fiercely to keep the creature at bay. Bullets pierced its grotesque flesh, causing it to howl in agony. The battle raged on, a symphony of chaos and desperation. As the creature's movements grew sluggish and its roars grew weaker, Emily Lawson knew it was their moment. She stepped forward, her hazmat suit-clad form trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. In her gloved hand, she held a device of her own design, one that could disrupt the creature's vital processes. With unwavering determination, Emily approached the creature. Its glowing eyes locked onto her, a mix of fury and helplessness in its gaze. She activated the device, and a surge of energy coursed through the creature's body, causing it to convulse in pain. The outcome of the battle hung in the balance, a tense silence enveloping the team. Then, with a final, agonized roar, the mutated horror collapsed to the ground. Its once glowing skin faded to a sickly gray, and its monstrous form began to wither away. The specialists watched in awe and relief as the creature disintegrated before their eyes, leaving behind only a fading echo of its malevolence. Emily Lawson, her face streaked with tears of exhaustion and triumph, stepped back from the now lifeless husk. But the victory came at a heavy cost. Dr. Lawson's hazmat suit bore the marks of the battle, and her body trembled from the strain of using the device. She had risked everything to ensure the creature's defeat, and her sacrifice was evident in her weary form. With the mutated horror vanquished, the specialized team gathered around Dr. Lawson, their gratitude mixed with sorrow. She had paid a steep price for their success, and her sacrifice would be remembered as a testament to their unwavering determination. In the days that followed, the Chernobyl exclusion zone began to heal from the devastation wrought by the creature. Nature slowly reclaimed the desolate landscape, and the memories of the horrors that had transpired began to fade. But the consequences of their actions lingered. The radiation levels in the exclusion zone remained high, a haunting reminder of the price paid to contain the threat. The team had saved the world from a terrifying monstrosity, but they knew that their own lives had been forever changed. As they left Chernobyl behind, the team reflected on the enduring impact of their actions. The story of the unleashed creature and their heroic efforts would become a cautionary tale, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who faced the unknown and emerged victorious. Marianne gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as she wound up the misty hills toward Willowbend Village, the quaint little town nestled in the northern forests of the United States. This open house had to go perfectly. After a string of lackluster sales months, her reputation as a top realtor hung by a thread. She had been unable to sell houses, deal after deal falling through due to her unprofessionalism and being unable to keep appointments with her clients. The glass house would be her salvation. She just knew it. She jumped at the chance to get the listing that no other realtor would touch. The dreaded, cursed glass house. A curse for some, an opportunity for others, she thought to herself, smiling brightly. Her heartbeat quickened as the eccentric structure came into view, perched at the end of a cobblestone lane. Crystal walls winked in the pale light, beckoning her. Steeling herself, Marianne stepped onto the polished glass porch, her high heels making loud clacking noises as she walked confidently towards the front door of her salvation. As the front door creaked open, she shivered against the cold draft that swept past. Her heels clacked loudly in the silence as she crossed the threshold into the foyer. Dust moved out of her way, bringing a sense of worry to her mind about the cleanup that would inevitably have to happen before she could even think about bringing in a potential buyer. She needed this desperately. Her career depended upon everything going off without a hitch. But it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever is. She noted the living area bathed in sunlight, yet edged with lingering shadows crawling up and down the walls, almost looking like misshapen humanoids. The very idea that someone could be hiding in the shadows, watching her, made her uneasy as she walked through the house. A chill crept down her spine, but she shook it off, concentrating on the task at hand. This house would turn her fortunes around. It had to. Venturing deeper, Marianne called out brightly, but her voice barely echoed. Unease bloomed in her gut. The smooth glass walls suddenly groaned and shifted. Marianne froze, watching the panels rotate and seal shut around her, as if the glass house had clamped down like a trap. Marianne's breaths came sharp and fast in the airless space as she pressed against the curved glass walls, searching for escape. This must be some kind of mistake or sick joke, she thought to herself, in a desperate attempt to calm her nerves. This must be why no one else wanted this listing, so they could pull some kind of sick joke on me. Her fear turned to anger before quickly dissipating as she tried to look for a way out. But the surface rippled under her palms as if she'd disturbed dark waters. From the creeping shadows came hushed voices, recounting unimaginable horrors committed within this house. Their warnings increased as the maze undulated around her. Marianne stumbled on, the frigid air burning her lungs. There had to be a way out somehow. The voices swelled, guiding her turns, compelling her toward long-abandoned rooms. Muted cries echoed from somewhere deep within the labyrinth. Gritting her teeth, Marianne felt along the glass, her fingertips going numb. But she was determined to follow the voices and find the truth of this house's buried past. The dim passageways twisted endlessly as Marianne navigated the shifting walls. Shadowy figures flickered in her periphery, their anguished faces pleading. She shook her head against the visions, but they persisted. The glass maze pulsed with strange energy, rerouting her steps each time she drew near an exit. Marianne's breath seized in her chest as the temperature plummeted further. Each new corridor appeared darker than the last. Still, she pushed on, fueled by desperation, glimpsing the house's tragic memories. Cries of pain, lives cut brutally short, evil etched into every surface. The voices swelled in urgency, enticing her toward salvation. Marianne stumbled over debris, hands scraped and knees bloodied, but she forged ahead, guided by those trapped souls. Marianne lost track of how many hours had passed wandering the lightless maze. The frigid air leached the strength from her limbs even as the voices filled her mind. She paused at a stained glass panel depicting a twisted human form. This house's foundations were poisoned by generations of anguish. Cold certainty gripped Marianne then. The glass house had to be destroyed. Only rubble could silence the echoes of atrocity committed here. Renewed purpose burned in her veins as she trailed her fingers along the glass, leaving a crimson streak. The voices guided her onward through the gloom, past monstrous scenes of torment frozen behind the crystal walls. At long last, Marianne crawled toward a distant glow. sheltering her eyes against the blinding light. The exit lay just ahead if only she could reach it. The voices swelled in anticipation, urging her forward. Sunlight spilled over Marianne as she dragged herself from the glasshouse's clutches and collapsed onto the brittle grass. Every muscle screamed from exertion and cold. Her mind reeled, haunted by gruesome visions from deep within the crystalline labyrinth. As feeling returned to her numb hands, Marianne knew she could not let what she'd witnessed fade to silent complicity. This house's dark legacy had to be brought to light. Over the next weeks, emboldened by her own experience, Marianne gathered accounts from others who had found themselves trapped within the shifting glass walls over the decades. Too many had glimpsed the lingering evil. Their collective stories in hand, she pleaded with the Willow Bend Council to demolish the structure she had once admired. The town elders hesitated, bound by bureaucracy, until Marianne's fervent conviction swayed them. The date was set. The glass house would fall. In the days before demolition, Marianne felt the weight of the task at hand settle upon her weary shoulders. Though merely a witness to the glass house's horrors, she now carried the memories of countless victims. Restless nights left her gazing out her window at the distant crystal walls winking in the moonlight. She revisited her research, reminding herself what poison had seeped into the soil beneath that cursed foundation. The ghosts of the past cried out, demanding justice she alone could not grant. But Marianne had set events in motion now beyond her control. Soon their voices would echo no more, released from their glass prison. As she dressed on the cold, misty morning of demolition, Marianne steeled herself. Today had to happen, though it could not undo past wrongs. The glass house had to fall. A solemn crowd lined the cobblestone lane, muffled anticipation hanging over them as Marianne took her place. A frigid breeze whipped her coat as she watched the wrecking ball shift into position. With a deafening crack, the iron sphere swung into glittering walls. Glass exploded in a crystalline rain as the first blow landed. The structure groaned as its smooth facade began giving way to the onslaught. Marianne remained steady amidst the spectacle of destruction, mesmerized by the unfolding violence and chaos. The glass house fractured further, spilling its secrets and releasing its prisoners. As the crew delivered the final blows, the building collapsed in a muted roar, glass shards billowing outward. The voices that had haunted its maze carried on the wind. Finally, unfettered, it was done. The glass house was no more. In the aftermath, Marianne wandered the rubble, the only sound the crunching of glass fragments under her feet. The shadows had lifted, the cold banished from the surrounding air. Light poured over the now exposed foundation in cleansing beams. At last, unburdened by the haunting memories she had unearthed, Marianne turned away from the demolition site, glimpsing faces in the dispersing crowd alight with shared relief. The glass house could never again exert its perverse hold, having succumbed to hard-won justice. Its broken remains now formed an enduring memorial to those it had consumed. As she left Willow Bend behind, Marianne glanced back one final time. The glass shards caught the noon sun, winking like stars scattered to light the way forward. As I approached the imposing Gothic facade of the city's oldest mortuary on my first day of work, I felt a nervous energy thrumming through my veins. I paused outside the immense wooden doors, steadying my breath before pulling one open and stepping inside. I was immediately enveloped by musty shadows and the faint chemical smell of embalming fluid. My footsteps echoed down the long central hallway as I took in the dark wood-paneled walls, elaborate crown molding, and soft flickering gas lamps in antique sconces that cast dancing shadows. This historic building exuded an aura of mystery that both unsettled and intrigued me. A tall, stern-faced man introduced himself as Mr. Thorne, my new supervisor. He spoke in a brusque monotone as he briefly showed me around. The cold, clinical nature of the stainless steel embalming room gave me chills. The body bags lined up in the frigid basement chamber made me shiver. The jars of viscera on the shelves of the preparation room compounded my anxiety. Throughout the tour, Mr. Thorne droned on repetitively about procedures, his imposing presence putting me on edge. At last, Mr. Thorne led me to a small, cramped office tucked away in the shadows that had belonged to the previous mortician. "This is yours now," he intoned gravely before leaving me alone. The dusty space was cluttered with papers, specimen jars, and antique texts. Settling into the creaking leather chair, I began tidying up. In the bottom drawer, I found a cloth-bound journal filled with peculiar numbered rules and superstitions. I scanned the entries with amusement at first, but then growing unease. The previous mortician had clearly been rather melodramatic. I didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. These rules were merely ridiculous superstitions. Shaking my head, I tucked the journal away, wanting to start my shift with a clear head. Later that evening, while prepping a body, I thought I saw shapes moving in the shadows. Probably just my eyes playing tricks on me, I assured myself with a nervous laugh. Still, I felt a prickle on my neck as if being watched. The odd journal crept back into my mind, but I brushed it off. This job would take some getting used to. No need to give in to melodrama. After finishing up past midnight, I gathered my things to leave. Just then, a faint shuffling sound came from the dark hall. I froze, listening. Silence. Laughing at my skittishness, I hurried outside into the misty night. Lack of sleep was clearly affecting my nerves. Still, the sound echoed eerily in my mind, as did the fluttering shadows. Over the next weeks, I became more accustomed to the long, empty halls and heavy silence of the mortuary. I went through my daily tasks with growing confidence, no longer unsettled by the time spent among the deceased. This was my job now, and I took pride in my work. Still, thoughts of that strange journal in my desk drawer often crept into my mind. One bizarre rule stuck out. Number 2. If you hear crying, leave immediately and lock the door. Don't enter again until it stops. I chuckled at the notion of dead bodies crying. How absurd. Yet, I felt uneasy whenever I sat near that locked drawer. Tempted to retrieve the journal and read more, I resisted, not wanting to indulge silly superstitions. It happened on a cold winter evening in the basement chamber. At first, I thought I heard faint sobbing. I paused, but then shook my head and continued working. Just the old building creaking, I reasoned. But the cries came again. Soft, mournful weeping that chilled my blood. Pulse racing, I crept toward the sounds but found nothing that could be producing them. I forced an uncomfortable laugh, clearly just auditory hallucinations due to lack of sleep, enhanced by that suggestive journal. Still I stood, transfixed, nerves tingling. The anguished sobs had seemed so real in the moment. Shaken, I rushed from the chamber and locked myself in my office. I read rule number 2 again, hands trembling. As a man of science, I did not frighten easily, but no more late nights alone down there, I resolved. I would observe proper rest for a clear mind. Surely the decrepit boiler was carrying odd sounds through the walls and vents. Let logic, not superstition, guide me. In the days following the unexplained weeping, I spent more time upstairs, avoiding the basement when I could. Here I felt grounded in the bright lights and bustle of grieving families. I took comfort in the meticulous methods of preparing bodies for presentation. The rigorous procedures provided order, which I craved. I could lose myself in the work and ignore the peculiar events plaguing my thoughts. One morning, going over my schedule, my eyes snagged on a scrawled note. Rule 3. Always count bodies before and after shifts. I frowned in annoyance. That disturbing journal still invaded my mind at times. Banishing the thought, I thoroughly documented the bodies in my care, refusing to indulge irrational rules. That night I stayed late, carefully dressing a deceased man for his memorial service. It was nearly midnight when I finished, exhausted. I decided to do a final check that all was in order, but I froze. Hadn't there been 12 occupied caskets earlier? Now only 11 remained. Pulse thrumming, I recounted twice more. Indeed, only 11 shrouded forms lay before me. I searched everywhere, finding no misplaced body. Perplexed, I sank into a chair. Perhaps I had miscounted initially due to fatigue. As a meticulous man, the thought grated on me. But what else could explain the discrepancy? Feeling unsettled, I departed into the misty night. The next morning brought an even greater shock. The pristine preparation room was now short one corpse. Methodically, I scoured the locked room again and again, but the missing body had simply vanished. Heart-lurching, I recalled the journal's rule that if the numbers ever differed, I should immediately vacate the premises. Nerves jangling, I backed toward the exit, eyes darting around. The untouched room offered no answers. With growing dread, I realized something sinister lurked here, covertly stealing corpses for sinister purposes. For the first time, I willingly locked up and fled into the light of day. But deep disquiet took root in my soul. In the days after the baffling vanishings, I reported each night gripped by lingering dread. I now avoided the shadowy basement, completing duties on the well-lit main floor where I felt less exposed. I negotiated earlier hours so others would be present, never working alone past sunset now. But I could not evade the disquiet permeating the premises. My scientific mind struggled to explain the bizarre events. I considered confiding in my supervisor, but hesitated, worried he'd think me unstable or worse. No. For now, it seemed prudent to keep the unsettling experiences private. I hoped adhering closely to the peculiar journal's rules might offer some protection from forces I did not understand. One rule in particular troubled me. Number 4, never gaze into a mirror longer than a few seconds. Something unnatural might gaze back. Absurd, I thought at first, and yet, the funeral home contained numerous tall mirrors elegantly lining the halls and viewing rooms, their surfaces glinting ominously. Late one night, while straightening the viewing hall, I caught my reflection watching me from across the room. Just my ordinary face, or so it seemed. Shaking off the unease, I busied myself preparing the caskets, ensuring everything was in order. Satisfied, I turned to go, thinking ahead to the next tasks. From the corner of my eye, a flickering movement in the mirror snatched my attention. Heart lurching, I whipped around. The empty room stared back innocently. But when I reluctantly met the glass's gaze again, my likeness contorted grotesquely before resuming its mimicry. Chilled to the core, I fled to my office where I slumped against the closed door, struggling to slow my ragged breathing. Whatever sinister presence inhabited the glass, I wanted no part of it. The innocuous journal rules were now my only defense against the unnatural forces creeping at the fringes of my reality. In the uneasy weeks following my mirror encounter, I learned to carefully avoid any reflective surfaces within the funeral home, keeping my eyes downcast as I scurried past with hunched shoulders. It was the only way I could continue working there, despite the bizarre and frightening things I had witnessed. I desperately needed the income to eventually escape this place. One gray, drizzly morning as I hurried to prepare a viewing room, an unexpected scent wafted by that made me freeze in my tracks. The sweet fragrance of roses. I sniffed the air, turning my head. The pleasing floral aroma seemed to emanate from just ahead, growing stronger as I cautiously walked forward. With dawning unease, I realized this particular smell signified something ominous. Searching my memory, I recalled rule number 5 from the journal. If you detect roses, stand motionless until the scent fades away. My pulse skyrocketed and my mouth went dry. Hardly daring to breathe, I obeyed the compulsion, every muscle rigid and alert for any sign of movement in the empty corridor. The flowery perfume rapidly intensified until it became cloying and overpowering, erasing the ever-present undertones of carnations and lilies used in arrangements throughout the building. Without warning, a bone-numbing cold enveloped my shoulders, like frigid skeletal claws digging into my flesh. I gasped, staggering against the wall as my knees nearly buckled. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I remained paralyzed by supernaturally imposed stillness, trapped in waking nightmare. The saccharine stench of roses grew sickeningly pungent, permeating the air while my vision blurred at the edges. After an interminable time, the phantom icy grip began dissolving along with the stomach-turning fragrance assailing my senses. Blinking slowly, I stepped forward unsteadily, one hand braced against the wall for support as I moved on trembling legs down the hallway. I did not stop until safely barricaded in my office, the door locked behind me. With shaking hands, I retrieved the journal from its drawer, seeking some talismanic protection from the bizarre forces plaguing this place. But the pages offered little comfort or insight, just more enigmatic words I no longer fully trusted. Later, once I had recovered some semblance of equilibrium, I ventured cautiously back into the empty hallway, sniffing the air. The cloying rose perfume was gone without a trace, as if it had never assaulted my senses at all. I stared around in bewilderment and dread, struck by how swiftly and totally innocuous surroundings could morph into a choking miasma of supernatural threat. The journal's bizarre rules were my only guide to navigating a reality that now felt dangerously unmoored. With no other choice left, I uneasily resumed my duties, senses straining in hypervigilance for the next uncanny onslaught. Despite the increasingly frightening supernatural events I had endured, I forced myself to continue working at the funeral home out of stark financial necessity. I now refused to stay on the shadowy lower levels after dark, and never lingered anywhere on the premises past sunset if I could avoid it. According to the journal, midnight held special ritual significance as the witching hour when ominous forces proliferated. Rule number 6 warned, if whispers arise after midnight, do not listen. Leave immediately, and do not return until dawn. In the past, I had scoffed skeptically at such notions, but my faith in a rational world had been soundly shaken by what I had witnessed. And so, I stayed late, one blustery winter night, focused on catching up on paperwork. Shortly after midnight, I finally set down my pen with a tired sigh and rubbed my aching temples. As I sat motionless, a faint, anomalous sound needled my awareness. Whispers. The hair on my neck prickled. I ceased all movement, scarcely daring to breathe as I strained to listen. The furtive, susurrant murmuring was barely audible, but continuous. Then alarmingly, amidst the stream of wispy sounds, I distinctly heard my name called out. Icy fear clutched my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. Fighting the urge to scream, I scrambled up so quickly I knocked over my chair and tore from the building, heedless of procedure or decorum. Outside, I gulped lungfuls of fresh night air as I raced to my truck. Only once safely home with all the lights burning to ward off the whispering shadows did I begin to regain my composure. The next night, I doubled my workload, desperate to avoid remaining in the funeral home past the witching hour ever again. As midnight approached, my nerves thrummed with dread, and the slightest unexpected creak or groan made me flinch. But 12 o'clock came and went, uneventfully, as I focused intently on my tasks. It seemed keeping my mind disciplined and alert was the key to enduring the growing menace that filled the building as soon as the sun sank below the horizon. I still had 3 more weeks before my planned resignation. I just had to hold on and stay vigilant. The journal's rules would guide me. Without them, and the wisdom of the previous undertaker who had penned them, I suspect I would have lost my mind completely by now. Staying constantly occupied and productive during my shifts had become my coping mechanism and way to pass the long, lonely nights at the funeral home. I refused to dwell on the uncanny supernatural happenings or heed any slight sound or hint of movement in the shadows. Instead, I maintained a rapid pace and certitude of purpose in my actions on the main floor, efficiently completing each task on my checklist one by one. But late one night, as I tidied the plush carpeted viewing room, a muffled thump sounded from the end of the row of polished caskets. My heart seized. I froze in place, poised between fight or flight, pulse thundering in my ears. The thump came again, unmistakable, yet somehow surreal. Every instinct screamed at me to flee outside to safety, but some deeper intuition stayed my feet. The malevolent presence was already here within these walls, permeating every shadow-cloaked corner. So instead I descended to the dank basement level I usually shunned, seeking some small haven in the maze of little-used rooms. In a musty storage alcove, I squeezed into a lightless corner and pulled the door tightly shut, sealing myself in complete darkness. Crouched there shivering in the oppressive cold, I strained my ears for any sign of movement outside, but all I heard was the pounding of my own racing heart and my ragged, shallow breaths as I tried to calm myself. At last, the soft scrape of a footstep echoed in the hall. My chest tightened and I held my breath. The footsteps grew louder, too deliberate, and heavy to be a figment of my imagination. Suddenly, a bright shaft of light cut through the crack beneath the door. I bit my lip to suppress a terrified whimper as the light paused, wavering, as if the unseen presence outside was deciding its next move. Time seemed to stretch into eternity as I waited breathlessly, knees drawn up and arms wrapped tightly around them, paralyzed by dread. Suddenly, the harsh glare vanished as if extinguished, and silence reigned once more. I exhaled in shaky relief and slowly uncurled from my cramped position. But I dared not emerge from my makeshift sanctuary until the first rosy fingers of dawn began to touch the sky. When I finally emerged from the alcove, the basement was eerily quiet and dimly lit. I cautiously crept up the stairs and out onto the main floor, senses alert for any hint of movement. The viewing room where I had fled from lay in chaotic disarray, the row of caskets all askew, their velvet-lined lids gaping open. A chill wind whistled through a broken window, stirring the lacy drapes and chilling my bones. I hurriedly righted the caskets, straightened the mess, and locked up, eager to flee the increasingly unsettling place. As I made my way home, the shock of my harrowing ordeal began to set in. My hands trembled on the wheel and my thoughts raced. The supernatural entity plaguing the funeral home was far more insidious and malevolent than I had imagined. And with each passing night, its attacks grew more brazen and aggressive. I would have to be constantly on my guard if I hoped to survive. To bolster my defenses, I retrieved the journal from my desk drawer and studied its pages more intently than ever, searching for any clues or patterns in the bizarre rules that might help me avoid further confrontations with the shadowy presence. Many of the rules were more enigmatic than ever and seemed to serve no clear purpose, like rule number 7, which warned to never wear the color red after dark. And yet I sensed an underlying coherence to them, as if they were designed to manipulate or placate the malevolent entity. All I had to do was decode the hidden meaning behind each rule and discern their connection to the presence. As the days turned to weeks, my routine became more strict and regimented. I adhered religiously to the journal's rules and developed new ones of my own, like never entering the basement after sunset and avoiding the mirror-lined halls as much as possible. I also took to wearing a crucifix around my neck and smudging each room with sage in the hopes of dispelling the oppressive energy that now permeated the funeral home. With my renewed vigilance and heightened awareness, I managed to avoid any more direct encounters with the shadowy presence for several weeks. I began to hope that perhaps the worst was behind me. But then one night, as I was preparing to lock up and leave, I heard a familiar rustling sound coming from the viewing room. My heart skipped a beat and I froze in place, straining to listen. The rustling grew louder and more insistent, as if someone or something was rummaging through the room, searching for something. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the narrow slit of the window, but the room appeared empty. Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the glass, momentarily obscuring my view. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the rustling stopped, and the room fell silent. I hesitated, debating whether to go inside or flee, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence was still lurking nearby, waiting for me to make my move. So with a deep breath, I cautiously stepped into the room. Marie was always in search of the unknown, the mysterious. She loved everything eerie, which is why she often scoured old estate sales, looking for peculiar items. One day, she found a nondescript novel with no title or author at a particularly ancient estate sale. Intrigued, she bought it. When she opened it at home, she realized that the words seemed to shift on the page, reconfiguring themselves every time she looked away. Thinking it a trick of the light, she began to read. As she delved into the story, Marie realized it detailed events of her own life. Every success, every failure, even her deepest secrets were laid bare on the page. But the narrative went beyond the present, into events she had yet to experience. At first, Marie was fascinated. She read about a promotion at work before it happened. Then she read about a chance encounter with an old friend at a cafe. Both events came true precisely as the book described. However, her enchantment soon turned to horror when she turned the pages to find the description of her own death. The story told of her walking in the woods, the ground suddenly giving away beneath her feet, trapping her in a sinkhole, unable to call for help. Terrified, Marie made a decision to never venture near any woods. Weeks turned to months, and she avoided the described fate. Confident that she had changed her destiny, she revisited the book one evening. To her surprise, the pages describing her demise in the woods were blank. Instead, a new passage appeared, describing her in her living room, reading a book as the ceiling above her collapsed, burying her in debris. Panicking, she fled her house, opting to spend the night at a hotel. The next morning, she returned home, cautiously inspecting her living room. Everything seemed normal. Thinking the book's prediction had been averted again, she decided to get rid of it once and for all. But as she reached for the book to toss it, it flipped open on its own, revealing another new passage. This time, it described her standing in her doorway, heart racing with fear, as an unseen intruder approached from behind. Before she could react, a chill ran down her spine. A shadow loomed over her, and a cold breath whispered in her ear, "You can't escape the story." The next estate sale held in town had a curious item up for grabs. A nondescript novel with no title or author. A young man named Jack decided to attend the estate sale, intrigued by the description of the mysterious novel. He managed to purchase the book for a low price, as the other attendees seemed wary of it. Back home, Jack began to read the novel, quickly realizing the supernatural power it held. Just like it had for Marie, the book ominously detailed Jack's potential future, including a gruesome car accident that would claim his life. Terrified, Jack avoided driving his car for weeks, convinced he had changed his fate. But one night, curiosity got the better of him. He picked up the book again, only to find the pages about the car accident blank, replaced with a new scene depicting his death by electrocution in his bathtub. No matter where Jack went or what precautions he took, the book always seemed to predict his demise in vivid new ways. He tried destroying it, but the book would reappear, along with more disturbing premonitions. Jack soon became a paranoid recluse, refusing to leave his heavily fortified home. But the book continued to torment him with its ever-changing prophecies. Finally, unable to take the terror any longer, Jack confronted the book one last time. As before, its pages flipped open to a new scene showing his death. But this time, the description was of Jack going mad from fear, taking his own life to escape the book's torment. Realizing that this was the story's final plot against him, Jack slammed the book shut in defiance. "I control my own destiny." The shadows seemed to creep closer as we hiked deeper into the forest, the night air thick with a chill that seeped into my bones. This training exercise was supposed to be routine, just another navigation test to prove our skills. But I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that had settled over me. With each step, the trees appeared to bend inward, bare branches reaching out like skeletal hands to bar our way. Our night vision goggles cast an eerie green glow, yet did little to pierce the darkness that surrounded us. The others marched on steadily, oblivious to the sinking dread that clawed at my insides. But the forest knew. I could feel its watchful presence tracking our every move. A snap of twigs to my left made me whirl around, rifle raised. But there was nothing. only shadows. "Get a grip, rookie," Jackson muttered as he brushed past, his hulking frame momentarily obscuring the path ahead. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Just my imagination playing tricks on me. We were getting close now, the navigation device indicating that the hidden package was just half a click northeast. Breaking through a dense copse of trees, we found ourselves at the edge of a small clearing. Barely visible against the brush was a metallic box, tucked away just as Command had promised. As we moved in, a mournful wind stirred, carrying with it anguished whispers that raised the hair on my arms. The fallen leaves swirled violently, as if stirred by some unseen force. That's when they appeared. Shuffling from the tree line, ragged silhouettes emerged with stiff, unnatural gaits. Soldiers. But something was wrong. Flesh hung from their emaciated frames. Uniforms were stained with dark splotches that looked unsettlingly like old blood. Their eyes, just barely visible through shredded skin and muscle, were a milky white. Dear God, these weren't soldiers. These were corpses. Gunfire erupted as my teammates unleashed their weapons. The staccato bursts illuminated the undead monstrosities in brief flashes. Riddled with bullets, they staggered back, but impossibly remained standing. Fear threatened to override my training. These things couldn't be real. Zombies only existed in horror films, right? The shuffling corpses advanced relentlessly, mouths opening to emit an awful groaning. The primal part of my brain screamed at me to run, but I forced my shaking hands to lift my rifle. I fired round after round, watching as chunks of decaying flesh exploded from the advancing horde. Still they came, heedless of their wounds. One lurched forward with jaws snapping, chunks of skin peeling away from its face to reveal the bone beneath. I fired point blank into its skull, blasting it apart in a spray of thick, clotted blood. The thing collapsed at my feet, limbs still twitching. Before I could react, another grabbed me from behind, icy fingers digging into my shoulders with an unnatural vice-like grip. I struggled violently as its mouth descended toward my neck, its fetid breath washing over me. Twisting in its grasp, I smashed the butt of my rifle into its face. The force caved in the dried, leathery skin, exposing the rotten musculature underneath. It stumbled back, disappearing into the mass of bodies. Gasping, I scrambled away and unleashed a barrage of gunfire into the horde. Limbs were blasted off and torsos exploded, but nothing slowed their unrelenting advance. "We can't kill them!" I heard Jackson yell hoarsely. He was right. These things didn't operate by any natural laws. Recoiling in terror as a zombie lunged at me, I reacted on pure instinct and thrust my combat knife into its eye. Foul-smelling liquid spurted out as I drove the blade to the hilt into its putrid skull. It spasmed violently, then went limp. Yanking out the blade, I turned to see brows plummeting toward me, jaw unhinged grotesquely. I slashed wildly, hacking into its neck until the head detached from the body. But still, it snapped at me, rolling sickeningly on the ground as the body staggered onward. Nausea threatened to overwhelm me at the nightmarish sight. These were no ordinary zombies. We were facing an evil that seemed to defy any natural order. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the horror unfolding around us. All semblance of tactics forgotten. We now fought like cornered animals, stabbing and shooting in a frenzied desperation. But it was no use. The creatures kept coming, bodies mangled and torn apart, yet still somehow animate. Some moved on after losing everything below the ribcage, crawling relentlessly through the leaves, biting at our ankles and legs. As we pushed through the trees, I turned to see one dragging itself toward me, intestines trailing behind it, one baleful white eye glaring from a head split in half. Screaming, I brought my boot down again and again on its skull until it finally went still, the remaining eye dull and vacant. Panting, drenched in sweat, blood, and rotting effluvia, I looked around to see the creatures forming a tightening circle. We were surrounded, boxed in with no way out. These horrors would not stop until they had ripped us all to pieces. As the death circle closed in, I knew we were gazing into the face of true evil. Gunfire rang out, jolting me upright. The creatures fell back, dark oozing holes burst across their forms. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders, pulling me to my feet. Jackson's grizzled face, streaked with dirt and blood, swam before me. "On your feet, soldier," he bellowed. "We're getting out of this hellhole." We ran on, the two of us, supporting each other as we navigated the maze of trees. The sounds of the dead receded, but we did not stop until the trees thinned and we stumbled onto an old forest road washed in the first faint light of dawn. As we rested, the reality of what we had witnessed slowly started to sink in. The others were all gone. Of that, I was now certain. We had been pawns in some twisted experiment, confronted by an evil that defied all logic and training. Never again would I look at the world the same way. Command could never know what really happened in those cursed woods. They would never believe it. The official story would be a training accident, some equipment malfunction that resulted in casualties. But we would carry the truth forever, a burden only those who survived that horrific night could fully comprehend. As the first rays of the morning sun banished the shadows, I took one last look back at the forest that had almost claimed me. The trees were still once more. The horrors we had faced vanished like ghosts with the breaking dawn. But deep down, I knew they were only lurking, waiting for their next victims. None who ventured into that accursed place would ever emerge unscathed. The things we had witnessed were burned into our memories, never to fade. We had survived the night, but would forever be haunted by the horrors it had wrought. The journey back was long and arduous. Jackson and I supported each other, both physically and mentally, as we slowly made our way through the rugged terrain. The images of the nightmarish creatures plagued my thoughts, their soulless white eyes and grasping hands appearing every time I blinked. I couldn't stop replaying the terror of the chase, the guttural moans as they closed in. It was a small miracle we had made it out at all. As we reached the outskirts of the forest, we came across the remains of our comrades. Torn uniforms and dismembered body parts littered the undergrowth, painting a horrific picture of their final moments. I fell to my knees and retched violently, the gruesome sight burning itself into my memory. Jackson simply stood, staring numbly ahead, his face an unreadable mask. Reaching the extraction point, we were met with disbelief and suspicion. The debriefing was a blur of pointed questions, veiled accusations, and thinly veiled threats if we spoke publicly about what had transpired. The shattered remains of our team were written off as training casualties, with no mention of what had really killed them. It was clear we were expected to toe the official line. The truth would remain buried in those godforsaken woods. For weeks, I suffered relentless nightmares, jolting awake, drenched in cold sweat, visions of pallid dead soldiers still vivid in my mind. Jackson and I barely spoke, each lost in our own private hell, unable to voice the horrors we had witnessed. There were times I wondered if it would have been better to die back there with the others, rather than live with the eternal weight of what I now knew existed out there in the shadows. Our superiors kept a close watch, constantly probing for any cracks in the fabricated account they had created. The veiled threats persisted, and it became clear our military careers would be over if we dared speak out. This had gone far beyond just hiding the truth from the public. Powerful forces were at work to ensure what happened in those woods stayed buried. Weeks turned to months as Jackson and I were slowly transitioned out of active duty. A botched training mission. Tragedy at the hands of simple equipment failure and human error. That was the official truth. End of story. We played along during the day, but the real story haunted us at night. Neither of us would ever be the same. Sometimes, I still catch myself scanning the tree lines wherever I go, half expecting to see pale forms shuffling between the trunks. I doubt the visions will ever truly fade. What we endured out there transcended any normal horrors of war and combat. We glimpsed something inexplicable, an evil that defies understanding, and it has left wounds that will never properly heal. We survived, but will carry that cursed night with us forever. A piercing pain throbbed in Silas's head as consciousness slowly returned to him. He peeled his eyelids open with great effort, wincing at the ache behind his eyes. As his vision adjusted to the dim lighting, he realized he was sprawled on his back atop a cold stone floor. Strange, he didn't remember going to sleep here. Groaning, Silas forced himself up to a sitting position, blinking hard to clear his hazy vision. He appeared to be in some kind of circular chamber, the curved stone walls interrupted only by torches ensconced at regular intervals. Their flames cast flickering shadows that danced across the floor and walls. As Silas's eyes followed the curvature of the chamber wall, his breath caught in his throat. Surrounding him in a perfect ring were 13 doors, each set into an archway carved from aged, dark wood. Above each door hung an ornate wrought iron candle holder, a fat pillar candle within that provided additional light. 12 of the doors had antique clocks mounted just above them, their brass faces tarnished, but still gleaming in the firelight. The hour hands pointed to numbers from 1 to 12 in Roman numerals, as if marking a path around the circumference of the chamber. Oddly, the 13th door stood apart from the others, completely unadorned and unlabeled. Its presence exuded a foreboding energy that made the fine hairs on Silas's neck stand on end. Silas pressed his palms to his throbbing temples, trying to piece together how he came to be in this inexplicable chamber that felt torn from a past century. His mind felt foggy, memories jumbled and indistinct. He focused hard, grasping at the last clear thought he could recall. That's right. He had been driving home late at night after working overtime at the office. Exhausted but looking forward to collapsing into bed, anxious to put a long week behind him. He remembered the road was slick with recent rain, the pavement shimmering under the streetlights. The digital clock on his dashboard had just flipped to midnight when suddenly a pair of blinding headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, bearing down on him with terrible speed. Before Silas could react, his world exploded into screeching metal and shattering glass as the vehicles collided. After that, nothing. Just darkness. Cold understanding washed over Silas as the memory came into terrible focus. Today was Friday the 13th, and he had been in a horrific car accident. But if this place was the afterlife, then what was its purpose? Some sort of purgatory or waiting room before whatever lay beyond? A crumpled piece of paper clenched in Silas's fist caught his attention. He unfolded it to reveal a message scribbled in an unsteady, spidery hand. Confront your fears to find the way out. Silas felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. His way out of here? Did that mean there was a path back to the world of the living, or was his fate bound to this strange realm? Regardless, he did not like the cryptic implication that he would have to face unknown fears in order to progress. But it seemed answers would only come from venturing beyond one of the 13 doors surrounding him. Steeling himself, Silas rose unsteadily to his feet. There was only one way to move forward now. Silas's eyes were drawn to the small wooden door marked with a 1, as if compelled by some unseen force. He slowly approached, his footsteps echoing eerily against the stone floor. Up close, Silas could see the door was carved from heavy oak, darkened with age. The brass handle felt icy cold under his grip as he turned it with trembling hands. The door swung open, and Silas cried out as he was instantly engulfed by impenetrable darkness. The door slammed shut behind him, severing his view of the circular chamber. Silas's breath came in panicked gasps, his eyes straining but unable to penetrate the void. Then, faintly, Silas heard it. The slow, haunting melody of a lullaby drifted through the darkness. His blood turned to ice. He knew that song. It was the one his mother used to sing to him at bedtime as a child, but he hadn't heard it since. Like a curtain being drawn back, the darkness receded. Silas found himself standing in his childhood bedroom. Moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the familiar rocket ship bed covers and shelves lined with favorite toys. But rather than feeling comforted by the familiar surroundings, Silas felt only mounting dread. From under the bed came a sinister scuttling and scraping, the noises that had tormented his nights as a child, which he had attributed to the monsters he imagined lurking just out of sight. As the sinister sounds continued, cold fear constricted Silas's chest. He had to get out of there. Silas fled from the room back into the central chamber, his heart pounding. But this was only the first in the series of numbered doors. Steeling himself, Silas moved to the next door marked with a 2. This time, he found himself transported to the neighborhood park he had played at growing up. The swings and slides sat empty, except for one swing, which held a figure Silas hoped never to see again. It was Malcolm, the imaginary friend Silas had dreamt up as a lonely child without siblings. Only Malcolm had turned cruel over time, mocking and belittling Silas until he had banished the friend from his mind. But here he sat, flesh and blood, with a malevolent grin that chilled Silas to his core. Doors 3 and 4 continued the relentless assault on Silas's childhood psyche. Door 3 opened to the dark forest behind his childhood home, the crooked bare branches clawing at him like gnarled fingers. Dr. 4 revealed his grandmother's attic, filled with eerie mannequins and shadows that had haunted his youthful nights spent there. Each scenario forced Silas to confront suppressed fears from his past that he thought had been left behind. But this strange purgatory seemed intent on dredging up those buried phantoms, perhaps as a test of his courage. Jaw clenched, Silas carried on, determined to see this trial through to the end. Silas hesitated outside the oak door marked with a 5, readying himself for whatever lay beyond. He turned the handle and was momentarily blinded as he emerged into a bustling high school hallway. Lockers lined the walls, packed with chattering students killing time before next period. At first, Silas thought he had simply been transported back to his own high school days. But as his eyes adjusted to the scene, his stomach dropped. This wasn't just any school. It was his old high school. And the students weren't just any students. He recognized faces of former classmates he hadn't seen in over a decade. This was neither a dream nor a memory. Somehow, Silas had been plunged back to the most awkward, painful time of his adolescence. He instantly felt self-conscious, acutely aware of his adult body squeezing through throngs of teenagers. A bell rang, and the students began spilling into classrooms along the hall. As Silas scanned the room numbers, he felt his heart seize up. Room 205. This was his worst class. Taught by Mrs. Reed, the strictest, most intimidating teacher in school. The classroom where Silas had lived his most embarrassing high school moment. On trembling legs, Silas walked through the doorway. The chatter ceased as 24 pairs of eyes fixed on him. Mrs. Reed's piercing glare cut through him. "You're late," she accused. "Well, don't just stand there. Take the last seat and open your textbook." Silas's face burned crimson as he shambled to the only open seat in the back row. Heads turned and giggled spread as he stumbled into the desk. This was his personal hell, forced to relive the most humiliating episodes of his teenage years. Door 6 opened onto a raucous college house party, privately hosted in an off-campus house. Silas immediately spotted her across the crowded living room. Sarah. His first love. The girl who had captured his heart, only to later break it. He longed to talk to her again, but she stood arm in arm with the jock she had left Silas for. Doors 7 and 8 continued the misery, plunging Silas back into scenes of betrayal by friends, pressures to conform, and the alienation of those awkward years between childhood and adulthood. Though these wounds should have healed with time, being forced to relive them tore those old scars wide open. Jaw set, Silas trekked onward, yearning for this cruel stroll down memory lane to end. As Silas emerged from door 8, thoroughly emotionally drained, he hesitated before approaching the next in the series. He needed a moment to collect himself after being forced to relive the most agonizing memories from his adolescent years. Wiping a shaking, sweaty palm down his face, Silas leaned against the curved stone wall of the circular chamber. He realized his trials here were becoming progressively more psychologically demanding. While the first doors had preyed on childhood fears, these last 4 had dredged up the anxiety and anguish of his teenage years. He knew it would only become harder from here. The clocks above the remaining doors marched ever higher into the hours. What traumas from his adult life might lie within? Failures, regrets, betrayals? His psyche had accumulated no shortage of scars since adolescence. But backing out wasn't an option. He still remembered the cryptic words of the note urging him onward. Confront your fears to find the way out. Compartmentalizing his emotions, Silas took a deep breath and continued to the door marked 9. He crossed the threshold with trepidation, bracing for whatever came next. Stepping through the door marked 9, Silas found himself standing at the front of a church, dressed in a tuxedo. He felt his stomach drop as he recognized the flowering archway and rows of expectant guests. This was the wedding he had fled years ago, leaving his bride-to-be waiting at the altar. Silas's palms began to sweat as he relived the panic that had overwhelmed him that day, causing him to bolt like a frightened animal. He saw the heartbreak and humiliation on her face again as he abandoned his vows and disappeared from her life. Though he had feared commitment then, he would give anything now for a second chance with the woman he had so cowardly jilted. The 10th door opened onto a family dinner, where a bitter argument erupted between Silas and his parents about his struggling media career. Years of creative differences and financial disputes boiled over as Silas stormed out, refusing to see or speak to them for years after. He watched his younger self unfairly berate his parents, who had only wanted the best for him. Pride and stubbornness had led to an estrangement he would come to regret. Door 11 forced Silas to revisit the day he walked out on his passion project, a novel he had been writing for years. After receiving the umpteenth publishing rejection letter, he allowed frustration to override persistence. In a fit of anger, he deleted the entire manuscript, abandoning his creative dreams entirely. He could still feel the pang of regret as he watched his digital life's work wiped out keystroke by keystroke, but nothing prepared him for door 12. Here, Silas found himself in a dingy one-room apartment during the darkest period of his addiction. He had to witness himself, gaunt and hollow-eyed, increasingly neglecting work and relationships in favor of his all-consuming dependency. Even as he looked on in shame, his doppelganger shook out another cocktail of pills, slipping back into the void. It was like watching himself slowly commit suicide, powerless to intervene. Though each vision disturbed Silas to his core, they also reinforced an important truth. His actions had consequences, and he alone was responsible for the path his life had taken. He emerged from door 12 determined to take accountability rather than dwelling in regret. There was nothing to do now, but keep moving forward. Silas's hand trembled as he reached for the cold metal handle of the unmarked door. The ominous portal stood apart from the others, its surface etched with strange symbols he could not decipher. Silas steeled himself for whatever lay beyond this final threshold. With great effort, he pulled the heavy door open. It grated against the stone floor with an awful screech, as if it had not been opened in eons. Peering inside, Silas saw nothing but a small, square room, empty except for a chair in its center. Though every instinct told him to turn back, Silas forced himself across the threshold. As soon as he entered, the door slammed shut behind him with an air of awful finality. The walls around him then seemed to vanish entirely, replaced with mirrors on all sides reflecting Silas's pale and frightened face back at himself. He gasped as he noticed the reflections were not perfect duplicates. In each mirror, Silas saw subtle differences, variations in his clothing, hairstyle, even his age and expression. These were not mere reflections, but rather snapshots of parallel lives he could have led, had he made different choices at critical junctures. One mirror showed Silas in medical scrubs, having followed his childhood dreams of becoming a doctor. Another revealed a Silas in military fatigues, a route he had considered, but ultimately avoided. He saw glimpses of the lives he could have had: husband, father, artist, poet, professor. If only he had seized opportunities he had passed over. In the mirrors, Silas also witnessed darker fates he narrowly avoided. A Silas addicted to alcohol, divorced and destitute. A Silas behind bars in an orange jumpsuit. Even a Silas lying pale and cold on a mortuary slab. Seeing the roads not taken forced Silas to confront how each small decision had shaped his present reality. He was suddenly aware of the tremendous power he held over his life path, if only he seized it. At the chamber's center, the elderly man from Silas's note materialized as if from thin air. As their eyes met, Silas sensed that this man was a version of himself from a distant future. a road ahead he could still realize. "I am you," the elder Silas spoke, "or one possibility of your future self, should you have the courage to confront your past and forge a new path." Silas digested his words. So this was purgatory. A realm between worlds to reconcile one's mistakes before moving forward, wherever that may lead in the afterlife. Silence fell as Elder Silas waited for the revelations to sink in. Finally, Silas nodded solemnly. He was ready. The mirrored walls and alternate selves dissolved until only the warm light of the future shone through. He had channeled his regrets into redemption. Whatever lay ahead, he would not look back. Silas stood alone as the blinding light dimmed to a warm glow. The mirrors and his alternate selves had vanished. All that remained was an open doorframe, beyond which Silas could see a lush green meadow bathed in sunshine. After an eternity trapped in the circle of doors and faced with the ghosts of his past, the idyllic vista seemed too good to be true. Silas approached the doorway cautiously, half expecting the beautiful scene to dissolve into yet another cruel illusion. Yet as he crossed the threshold, feeling the soft grass and warm sunlight envelop him, Silas knew in his heart this was no trick. The world around him felt realer than anything he had experienced since the accident. Silas gazed up at the cloudless blue sky, the breeze gently rustling the meadow flowers. He drew a deep breath, filling his lungs with sweet air. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt at peace. It gradually dawned on Silas that his unearthly trials had come to an end. He had confronted the mistakes and regrets that anchored his soul to his past life. Now, he was being welcomed into whatever lay beyond. As he explored the meadow, Silas spotted a figure standing beneath a towering oak tree. It was the elder version of himself who had guided him in the mirrored room. The old man offered Silas a smile. "You have broken free of the shackles of your past," he said. "Now you are ready to take the next step in your journey, unburdened by regret." The elder Silas extended his hand. Silas clasped it without hesitation. Together, they walked toward a forest path that wound its way through the meadow towards strange new lands. Silas did not know where it led, but he feared no evil so long as he stayed on the righteous path. With his hard-won wisdom and acceptance, Silas now saw life as the gift it was meant to be. He had been granted the rarest second chance to live it right. As the last chains of purgatory fell away, Silas basked in limitless possibilities. Wherever his journey took him next, he would not look back nor squander a moment. The mountain air was still and silent as the first rays of sun crept over the craggy ridgelines of the Sierra Nevadas. In a small, bright orange tent perched precariously on a narrow, rocky ledge, Sarah lay awake, listening to the gentle breathing of her climbing partner Alex in the sleeping bag beside her. She shivered, though not from the cold. Out here, exposed at over 10,000 feet with barely enough room to stretch out, sleep was elusive. Her mind raced instead with thoughts of the day ahead and the imposing rock wall that awaited them. Sarah glanced over at Alex, taking in his tousled, sandy hair peeking out from his mummy bag, his face relaxed in sleep. She envied his ability to rest soundly, even in the most perilous of positions. For Alex, a veteran climber, this was just another night out among the towering peaks and cliffs he knew so intimately. They had been climbing together for years. Ever since that first fateful day at the rock gym when Alex offered to mentor her. Since then, they had developed an unspoken language, communicating through gestures and glances. Sarah trusted him fully. She knew there was no one more qualified to lead her on this multi-pitch ascent they had dubbed the Seraph's Rise. A shrill cry pierced the silence, startling Sarah. Her heart raced as she recognized the call of a Stellar's jay. Next to her, Alex stirred briefly, mumbling something incoherent before settling back into sleep. Sarah's gaze drifted to the narrow opening of the tent, where the first pinkish gold rays of the sunrise had begun to wash over the breathtaking sweep of the valley. Soon they would set out to summit this legendary route. As the mountain came alive with light, Sarah tried to ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. There would be no turning back now. Sarah sat up quietly in her sleeping bag, trying not to wake Alex as she pulled on her boots and began lacing them up with trembling fingers. She shook her head, frustrated by her own nerves. She had climbed countless peaks with Alex over the years, pushing herself to the limits of her endurance on his encouragement. He always seemed to inherently understand her abilities, knowing when to coax her past out and when to call for a break. Together, they had summited routes far more technically challenging than the one that lay ahead. Yet something about the Seraph's rise filled Sarah with foreboding. She shivered again despite the cozy warmth of her fleece jacket, her mind turning to hushed conversations around campfires, whispers of experienced climbers who had mysteriously vanished on the very route they would soon tackle. Some blamed the unpredictability of the weather, others speculated about loose and crumbling rock. But a few solemn voices hinted at something more sinister, an ancient and malevolent force that dwelt within the mountain itself. Sarah had always dismissed such talk as mere superstition, but here, suspended between earth and sky, the ominous warnings echoed in her mind. The tent rustled, and Alex emerged, his short, sandy hair sticking up at odd angles, and he grinned sleepily at Sarah as he pulled on his climbing harness. "Ready for this?" he asked. She wished she could match his enthusiasm. "I guess so," Sarah replied, hoping the gnawing doubt in her gut would fade with the ascent. Alex just smiled and squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Soon the cliffs awaited. Pointing her headlamp at the ground, Sarah forced herself forward into the rocky darkness. Sarah followed closely behind Alex as they picked their way up the steep, uneven terrain. Her headlamp illuminated a narrow circle of lichen-speckled rock and little else. She tried to focus on placing one foot steadily in front of the other, avoiding loose stones that could spell disaster. In the inky blackness, she grasped onto the comfort of Alex's presence, his silhouette barely discernible ahead. She tracked his movements, mimicking his steps and handholds. Here in his element, he moved with practiced grace, finding secure grips along the cliffside. They climbed slowly but steadily, the hours and pitches blending together. As the eastern sky lightened from black to deep cobalt, Sarah glanced up to see Alex's smiling face peering down at her from an outcrop. "First belay point," he called out triumphantly. Sarah felt a swell of relief and accomplishment, one pitch down without incident. Perhaps this wouldn't be as harrowing as she had imagined. She clambered up beside Alex onto the relatively spacious ledge, glad for a respite. As she sank gratefully to her knees, the rising sun at last crested the distant peaks in a dazzling burst of light. For a moment, the spectacle took Sarah's breath away, the climbing dread ebbing as quickly as it had come. "Not too bad, eh?" said Alex. Sarah nodded, the earlier ominous feeling almost forgotten. She gazed out at the valleys and rivers unfolding below them in intricate patterns, like a map coming to life. With the sunlight warming her face, her confidence grew. They would reach the summit together, as they always had. What did she have to fear? Newly invigorated by the sunrise, Sarah and Alex pressed onward and upward, the rock wall looming larger with each step. As Alex led the way, Sarah fell into the familiar rhythm of their climb. She focused on the placement of her hands and feet, each movement bringing her closer to the sky. The morning light cast the cliff face in sharp relief, alternating patches of sun-warmed stone and pockets of cool shadow. Sarah traced the intricate patterns of cracks and ridges, memorizing the landscape. She spotted a lone whitebark pine clinging stubbornly to the nearly vertical slope, its twisted branches testament to a lifetime of battling the elements. The higher they climbed, the more Sarah's doubts were swept away on the mountain breeze. She imagined the pride and joy that would come with topping out onto the summit ridge. The seraph's wings spread gloriously on either side. No supernatural force could stop them from conquering this peak together. Near noon, Alex paused at a narrow notch in the rock to set another anchor. As Sarah pulled herself up beside him, she noted his furrowed brow for the first time that day. Following his gaze, she spotted a dark bank of clouds gathering over the distant peaks. A cold gust confirmed the changing weather. Alex turned to Sarah, resolve glinting in his blue eyes. "We're close," he said. "If we pick up the pace, I think we can still beat the storm." Sarah nodded, fresh adrenaline already beginning to pump through her veins. She would not fail with the summit in reach. Alex gave her shoulder a quick squeeze, then turned to continue, pushing ever skyward. Sarah steeled herself and followed into the growing gloom. Sarah tried not to watch as the clouds rolled in, swallowing up the mountaintops one by one in a sea of gray. She kept her eyes fixed on Alex's feet instead, mimicking his steps exactly, trying not to dwell on their precarious position. The wind picked up velocity until it was buffeting them relentlessly, threatening to throw them off balance. Sarah's hair lashed at her cheeks as she bent her head low and fought for each handhold. Their pace slowed, but Alex pressed on doggedly, calling encouragement over his shoulder. "Just a few more pitches," he shouted above the gale. "We're close now." Sarah nodded, though she could no longer make out the summit through the swirling fog. She trusted Alex to navigate through the gathering tempest. Doubt resurfaced, but she pushed it down, focusing everything she had on the rock in front of her. With numb, trembling fingers, she followed Alex up a vertical crack, icy droplets of rain and sleet pelting her back. Just as she pulled herself over the lip, a deafening crack of thunder exploded directly overhead. She cried out in surprise and horror as a blinding bolt of lightning split the sky. In that flash, Sarah saw that Alex had already moved on. Blinking away the purple afterimage, she scrambled to catch up, her lungs burning as ominous rumbles echoed all around them. She slipped on slick rock but quickly regained her grip, dragging herself upward by sheer force of will. They were so close now, just beyond her field of vision. When her hand finally grasped the cold metal of Alex's anchor, a wave of relief washed over her. She had made it. They would summit together after all, just as she had imagined. Gripping tight, she pulled herself up towards Alex's waiting hand. Sarah grasped Alex's outstretched hand, expecting to feel his strong grip pull her up beside him. Instead, her stomach dropped as her fingers closed around nothing. Sarah's cry of alarm was lost in a peal of thunder as she fruitlessly clutched at the empty air. Eyes wide with confusion and fear, she frantically scanned the narrow ledge for any sign of Alex. Only his anchor remained, still fixed firmly in place. Sarah's mind reeled as she double and triple checked her harness, seeking any possibility that she had simply become unclipped from her partner. But the rope connecting them was intact, pulled taut from her weight, yet disappearing into the swirling mist above. "Alex!" Sarah screamed, panic rising within her. She yanked hard on the line between them, desperately trying to elicit some response. Had he fallen, been struck by lightning? But the rope remained stubbornly, impossibly taut. He had simply vanished. Numb with shock, Sarah hauled herself onto the ledge, limbs shaking violently as adrenaline coursed through her. She groped along the cliffside, searching for a handhold, a boot, some sign that Alex waited just out of sight. But her hands met only crumbling rock, slick with rain. "Alex, please!" she cried again, blinking against the freezing downpour. Thunder rumbled menacingly overhead. Ignoring it, she stumbled forward, following the rope upward into the dense, opaque fog. She called his name between sobs until her voice was raw and cracked. The line pulled her onward into nothingness. "They're ahead." Had that been movement? A flash of color through the gloom. Heart thudding, Sarah hurried recklessly toward it, hope against hope. But there was only more endless, empty gray. Alex was gone without a trace, and she was alone in the storm. Sarah's mind reeled as she stared at the taut rope disappearing into the swirling fog. Alex's baffling vanishing act made no sense, defying reason or explanation. But her shocked stupor could not last long. Fighting down her rising panic, Sarah knew she needed help, and fast. Fumbling with numb, trembling fingers, she retrieved her satellite phone and dialed the ranger station's emergency line. Static crackled on the line, but at last she was able to provide her coordinates and explain the situation in a rush of words. Alex was gone without a trace, no signs of falling or injury. Yes, she had checked all equipment and connections. No, there were no gaps in the belay line, no possible way he could have slipped free. Please, you have to get a search party out here right now. Shouting over the wind, Sarah provided what few details she could before losing the tenuous connection. Now there was nothing to do but wait, secured to this wind-swept precipice. She pulled her parka tighter against the chill. Would they even believe her? She could hardly believe it herself. Over the next agonizing hours, Sarah scanned the slopes below for any sign of searchers. But she saw only the mist swirling around the mountainside, occasional glimpses of the valley floor far below peering through its ghostly veil. No matter how many times she shouted Alex's name, only the winded echoed back. At long last, the thumping blades of a helicopter cracked the storm's monotonous drone. Shielding her eyes against the gale, Sarah spotted it descending through the clouds. She waved frantically, almost sobbing with relief, but that relief curdled into confusion and horror as the first rescuers approached and Alex's line failed to reappear. He remained vanished, with no end to the rope that bound them. Sarah could barely process the flurry of activity that followed. Rescue workers swarmed the cliffside, combing every inch, shouting into radios. Sarah was ushered into the helicopter and flown down to base camp, where a team of rangers waited to question her. In a daze, she recounted everything she could remember. The storm rolling in, the lightning strike, pulling herself up to Alex's anchored rope only to find him gone without a trace. The rangers exchanged uneasy glances as she described following the taut line up into the fog in vain. She could read the skepticism in their eyes. Over the next 48 hours, the mountains swarmed with search parties intent on finding some evidence of Alex or his body. They rappelled down every crevasse, sent drones over ridges, scoured nearby slopes. But as the hours wore on, a grim reality set in. There was simply no sign of him anywhere. When the last rescue team descended defeated down the mountainside, Sarah felt herself plunging into a nightmare. She cornered the lead ranger as he headed wearily to his truck. "You can't give up," she pleaded, voice breaking. "He's still out there, I know it." The ranger just shook his head, eyes full of pity. "We've searched everywhere possible. I'm sorry, miss, but your friend is gone. The mountain has him now." As he drove off, Sarah collapsed to her knees in the gravel, Alex's last words echoing in her mind. "We're close now." She had failed him, and the mountain had claimed him. She screamed into the empty darkness until her voice gave out. Alex was gone forever on the Seraph's rise. In the weeks following Alex's disappearance, Sarah withdrew into herself, haunted by his absence. She replayed every detail of their climb again and again, desperate for some clue, some thread that could unravel the mystery. Friends tried to comfort her, suggesting rational explanations. A lightning strike, a clifftop collapse, a freak avalanche burying Alex without a trace. But Sarah knew in her soul something far stranger and more sinister had transpired. Late at night, she pored over accounts of other climbers lost in the Sierra Nevadas, vanishings written off as accidents or exposure. She now saw patterns emerging, the strangeness of bodies never being recovered, of partners and gear left inexplicably intact. A dark legend seemed to shroud the high peaks, hinting at forces beyond understanding. By day, Sarah wandered the base trails like a specter, frightening other hikers with her gaunt appearance and wild eyes. She questioned everyone relentlessly about the mountain's past, believing somewhere within its history lay the key to Alex's fate. At night, her dreams placed her back on that cliffside, following the rope into oblivion. Increasingly obsessed, Sarah drove to the mountain every weekend, staring up at its indifferent facade for hours on end. The peak had claimed Alex, and now called inexorably to her. She imagined she heard his voice sometimes, echoing down from the rocks, stirring her to action. One chill morning, as the first rays of light hit the summit, Sarah shouldered her gear and began hiking, a determined fire blazing in her eyes. She would have answers, or join Alex in eternity. The mountain awaited. The endless depths of Rhine Forest stretched out in all directions, an ancient labyrinth of towering pines and maples that had seen generations of lumberjacks harvest its bounty. The trees here grew thick and dense, their canopies blocking out the sky in a ceiling of dark green. Only thin spears of sunlight could pierce through the thick foliage overhead. The forest floor below was carpeted in mosses and ferns, with rotting logs covered in mushrooms and lichen. The thick, earthy scent of soil and decaying leaves permeated the air. It was in this secluded world that the lumberjacks had their camp, connected to civilization by little more than a winding dirt road that weaved its way out of the shadowy woods. The camp was simple and rugged, with log cabins, a mess hall, and a barn for the horses and oxen that transported the felled trees. The men who worked here were as rough and weathered as the forest itself. For them, the camp was more home than the places they traveled from each season. The one familiar landmark in the sea of pines was the worn footpath that acted as a shortcut through the woods. The path had always been there, a dirt trail cutting through the dense forest. The loggers took the path daily as they set out to cut trees deep in the forest. It wound up and down hills, over fallen logs, and past babbling creeks. The path was simply part of the routine, well-traveled and reliable. But within the rustic camp, whispered legends were told of the mysteries surrounding the trail, origin tales shrouded in uncertainty and superstition. Among the seasoned lumberjacks was Ethan, a bright young newcomer who saw himself as rational and modern. He had a university education and believed in science, despite being born in a small rural town surrounded by folklore. Ethan dismissed the old-timers' ominous words as mere tales, stories passed down by bored minds with too much time around campfires. But as strange events began to unfold around the path, Ethan was forced to question everything he thought he knew. Would science and reason prevail? Or was there really something unnatural permeating the depths of Rhine Forest? Ethan overheard the hushed conversations around camp, the stories passed from one generation to the next. Tales of unexplained disappearances, loggers lost forever after taking the shortcut through the woods. There were whispered rumors of lights glimpsed in the trees, unearthly screams echoing down the trail at night. The path would shift unexpectedly, trees seeming to rearrange themselves when no one was watching. Portents of bad luck, a woodsman's instinctive warnings that could not be ignored by those tuned to the forest's subtle language. But Ethan remained unconvinced, his staunch skepticism shielding his mind from entertaining such irrational superstitions. The vanishing happened quickly, with no explanation. A crew had taken the path that morning, heading deep into the forest to harvest lumber. But as sunset approached, only some returned to camp. They claimed no knowledge of what had happened to the others. The missing men had been right behind them on the trail, but then suddenly they were gone without a trace. Search parties were dispatched, scouring the woods. The path the missing men took could not be located, almost as if it had never existed at all. Unease rippled through the camp. His curiosity was sparked after the incident. Once a harmless legend, the tales now seemed credible. Ethan began poring over old company records, digging into the dark history of Rhine Forest. Disturbingly, every decade or so, people would disappear without a trace, all somehow linked back to the path. A theory emerged from Ethan's late-night reading, whispers of a wandering gap that opened the way to a twisted parallel world. But could it possibly be real? Ethan urgently warned his coworkers about what he had uncovered about the path's past. He appealed to their logic and reason, presenting the documented evidence in an attempt to steer them away from the shortcut. But the next morning, the path appeared again amidst the trees, unchanged and beckoning. Ethan watched in horror as his crew naively took the shortcut, lured by its convenience and familiarity. They ignored his pleas, laughing off his disturbances as a product of too many ghost stories by the fire. One by one, as they walked deeper down the trail, the men began to blink out of existence, vanishing from sight without a trace, the sound of their voices echoing away in the distance until they faded to silence. In a desperate, last-ditch attempt to stop the madness, Ethan charged down the path, chasing after flickering glimpses of his friends' fading forms. As he ran, the forest around him darkened, the trees contorting into gnarled, nightmarish forms on either side of the trail. Ahead, the path led straight into a rend in reality, opening up into a shadowy, alternate version of the Rhine forest. Fighting back mind-bending terror, Ethan grabbed frantically at the eerily distorted figures of his crew, pulling them back from the brink of the gaping portal by the skin of their teeth. The passage between the worlds flickered and spasmed, finally snapping shut with a thunderous crack. Ethan collapsed in exhaustion, surrounded by the few survivors he had managed to save. Stunned and shaken to the core, they slowly made their way back to the camp in silence. Around the fire that night, the few who returned grappled with what they had witnessed, weighed down by the loss of those who did not make it back. Though the path had vanished for now, its presence lingered in their haunted eyes. The forest seemed tainted now, infected by some otherworldly force existing in the space between the trees, in the shadows beneath the ancient pines. What they had seen defied all reason and logic. In the aftermath, the shaken survivors related their horrific ordeal to the logging company owners. The executives deemed the forest tainted by forces beyond their control or understanding. They quickly shut down operations for good, leaving the camp and its haunted woods abandoned, untouched by axe or saw. News of the disappearances spread, the town wondering but never knowing the full scope of unexplainable events. Ethan said his goodbyes, leaving the remote forest behind. He knew he could never view the world now in the same rational, academic light. He left logging behind, searching instead for meaning in the unexplained mysteries still hidden in forgotten places across the globe. His experience led him to devote his life to studying such phenomena, seeking to understand forces that could not be simply explained away by science alone. The woods still called to him, but he did not dare return to the one place that had shaken his beliefs down to the core. Over the long years, Rhine Forest once again grew wild and dense, only visited occasionally by hunters or hikers who kept close to the edges, unaware of the area's dark history. But eventually, another logging firm caught wind of the untouched forest and its rare, fine timber. As generations passed, they dismissed the old stories as quaint folktales, seeing only the massive profit to be made. It was only a matter of time before the path returned the first day the new loggers arrived. As sure as the rising sun, it came back, winding innocently through the underbrush down the hill from their camp as if it had never left at all. The cycle continued unbroken, awaiting the next round of souls who would dare walk the disappearing trail, tempted by its secrets veiled in myth and horror. The forest keeps its mysteries, only revealing itself to those who look deeper, past the tangible tangle of branches and thorns and into the dark heart of the ancient woods. The golden sun hung in the sky, painting Sequoia Street with gentle strokes of warm light, whispering promises of serene days and tranquil nights. A symphony of laughter and life echoed along the lane, where houses sat close together, sharing tales of joy and neighborly bonds. Save for the newest addition at the end of the street, the air around it humming with whispers of untold potential and pristine walls waiting to be imbued with stories. The house, freshly built, shone with the innocence of untouched bricks and unmarked floors, its foundations untainted by the shadows of the past, a blank canvas in a sea of storied structures. The first owner to claim this untouched abode was a man of mystery, Mr. Ainsworth, a figure of enigma. His presence around the town was like a whisper in the wind, softly spoken, yet leaving an imprint on the listener's mind. When Mr. Ainsworth first crossed the threshold of his new dwelling, the air seemed to hum with anticipation, whispering secrets not yet written, and histories yet to unfold. The neighboring homes stood as silent watchers, their eyes, the windows, reflecting the untold tales and unborn shadows of the house at the end of Sequoia Street. Within the unsullied walls, Mr. Ainsworth immersed himself in manuscripts of forgotten lore and antique tomes filled with forbidden knowledge. His eagerness painted shadows on the pristine walls, whispering secrets in the ears of the innocent house, whose foundations listened and learned. By night, the hushed whispers of his incantations mingled with the rustle of the leaves, whispering secrets to the moon, leaving an echo of unsaid words in the air. The Virgin House absorbed these whispers, its heartbeat syncing with that of its mysterious owner. Feeling the stirrings of unseen forces within its walls, the people of the town, feeling the shift in the air, looked at the new house with cautious curiosity, whispering about the shadows that seemed to dance in the windows and the eerie silence that seemed to emanate from it. It became a silent observer, a keeper of unspoken secrets. Its facade, a reflection of the unknown entities lurking in its corners. The innocence of childhood was painted with whispers of the Shadow Man and his silent house, feeding young imaginations with tales of unseen spirits and unheard voices. The house, still wearing its construction innocence, became a symbol of the unwritten, the unspoken, a keeper of tales not yet told, as days turned into nights and shadows whispered secrets to the walls. Mr. Ainsworth, along with the house, started weaving a tapestry of unseen worlds and unknown entities, becoming a vessel for the mysteries of existence, waiting to be discovered. With every whispered incantation and every shadow cast, the air grew denser with untold tales, the house and Mr. Ainsworth becoming weavers of a symphony of shadows and whispers, composers of tales yet to horrify the peaceful world of Sequoia Street, and thus began the silent song of Sequoia, a melody of potential horrors, whispering the prologue to tales yet to unfold. In the light of day, Sequoia Street bathed in warmth, an oasis of laughter and camaraderie. The newly constructed house at the end, a silent guardian watching over the symphony of life unfolding around it. Yet, with the setting sun, the shadows grew longer, whispering secrets to the bricks and beams, etching tales of otherworldly whispers and unseen dimensions on the innocent walls of Mr. Ainsworth's abode. The air around the house seemed to be woven with tendrils of mist, the very breath of the unknown, wrapping around the structure, whispering secrets of ancient civilizations and forbidden rituals in the ears of the building, imbuing it with a wisdom it had not sought. The moonlight would touch the facade, each beam a bearer of hidden truths, painting the unmarked walls with unseen ink, each stroke a chapter of the untold. The quiet murmur of the nocturnal breeze carried fragments of lost languages, each syllable a droplet of forbidden nectar, feeding the roots of the house, making it a living, breathing entity. A custodian of the unseen, a keeper of the unspoken. The leaves would rustle in conspiratorial whispers, narrating tales of shadowed figures and cryptic symbols, their words becoming the blood of the house, coursing through its veins, making its heart beat with the rhythm of the unknown. Inside the untouched sanctuary, Mr. Ainsworth would sit by the flickering candlelight, his fingers tracing the ancient scripts, his lips mouthing the words of power, his breath becoming one with the essence of the house. The walls would listen, the floors would feel, and the ceilings would watch. The house becoming a silent participant in the dance of shadows and whispers, its essence intertwined with the man who brought the whispers to its ears. The shadows would play on the walls, each dance a recreation of celestial alignments and dimensional portals. The air vibrating with the energy of worlds unseen, of realms unfathomed. The untouched bricks would shiver, the unmarked floors would quiver, and the untainted beams would shudder. The house feeling the stirrings of energies not of this world, its innocence slowly being stained by the ink of the forbidden. The town's people, the whispers of the shadows reached their ears. Tales of the Shadow Man and his whispering house becoming the fabric of hushed conversations and fearful glances. The innocent house, its foundations still echoing with the laughter of construction workers and the warmth of the sun, became a reflection of the unseen and the unknown. Its visage a mirror to the shadowed worlds and whispered secrets. The children would look at the house with wide eyes, filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. Their dreams invaded by the shadows, their days filled with whispered tales. The house becoming the monster under the bed, the shadow in the closet. The house, its essence still echoing with the purity of its construction, became a symbol of the unseen and unheard, its shadow growing longer with each passing day, with every whisper heard, every shadow seen, and every secret learned. The house and Mr. Ainsworth became the weavers of a tapestry not meant for mortal eyes, their beings becoming a chalice for the knowledge of the shadows and the whispers, the keepers of the keys to doors unopened. And thus, the symphony of shadows and whispers grew louder, the prologue to the unwritten tales becoming the heartbeat of the once innocent house at the end of Sequoia Street. The days flowed like a gentle stream through the heart of Sequoia Street. The town bathed in an aura of peace, seemingly untouched by the whispers and shadows at the edge of reality. Yet, underneath the facade of normalcy, the air hummed with unease, the whispers growing louder, the shadows darker, as the untold stories etched deeper into the essence of the house. It was on a night bathed in silvery moonlight, when the tapestry of normalcy experienced its first tear, a void in the fabric of existence, a silent scream in the symphony of life. The town slept in innocent slumber, unaware of the unfolding chapter, the ink of destiny, silently scripting the tale of the first disappearance. A young man, known for his curious mind and adventurous spirit, had been drawn to the whispers of the shadows, the tales of the house at the end of Sequoia Street igniting a flame of curiosity within his soul. He walked towards the house, his steps echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat, the air whispering tales of uncharted territories and unknown entities, each step a journey into the unseen. The house watched his approach, its essence pulsating with the energy of the shadows and whispers, its walls echoing with the silent screams of forbidden knowledge, its doors a gateway to the unknown. He touched the door, his fingertips tingling with the energy of untold stories, the whispers growing louder, the shadows darker, the house breathing in sync with his breath. With the creaking of the door, the air became denser, the whispers a symphony of unseen worlds, the shadows a dance of unknown entities. He stepped inside, the house enveloping him in its essence, the shadows whispering secrets in his ears, the whispers painting visions in his eyes. The world outside faded, the reality he knew a distant memory, his being becoming one with the house, his essence a thread in the tapestry of the unseen. The town woke up to a sun less warm, the air less light. The whispers of his disappearance a cold breeze in the heart of Sequoia Street. The house stood silently, its facade a mirror to the unknown, its essence a keeper of the newly acquired tale. The shadows longer, the whispers louder. The townsfolk whispered in fearful tones, their words a mix of sorrow and fear, the disappearance confirming the tales of the Shadow Man and his whispering house. The children looked at the house with eyes wider, their dreams darker. The house, a living entity in their innocent minds, its shadows a reality in their innocent hearts. With the first disappearance, the house and Mr. Ainsworth became the guardians of a truth not meant for the world. their beings a vessel for the essence of the disappeared, their existence a reflection of the unseen and unknown. And thus, the symphony of shadows and whispers gained a new note. The tapestry of the unseen, a new thread. The house at the end of Sequoia Street, a living, breathing entity of the shadows and whispers, its story silently unfolding in the heart of the town. The disappearance was like a shadow cast upon the vibrant canvas of Sequoia Street, a silent, haunting symphony amidst the harmonious tunes of everyday life. The whispers now weaved through the air with an intensity that wasn't there before. Like the gentle stroke of a haunted brush painting unseen tales on the canvas of reality. The air was heavy with unspoken dread. Each glance shared amongst the townsfolk carried whispers of unspoken fears, and every shadow seemed to dance with secrets untold. The world around seemed to mirror the unsettling symphony emanating from the house at the end of the street. Every breeze seemed to carry whispers of lost souls, and every beam of moonlight seemed to paint shadows of otherworldly entities. People gathered in hushed tones, their words a mixture of sorrow and whispers of the unseen, the shadow of the house creeping into their conversations, the whispers of its essence seeping into their minds. They spoke of the Shadow Man and his whispering house, their words painting pictures of unseen realms and unknown entities, the tales becoming shadows in their minds, whispers in their souls. Children's play grew more cautious, their laughter tinged with the unseen shadows, their games echoing the whispered tales. The house was no longer just a structure in their innocent worlds. It became a living shadow, a whispering entity. Its presence a constant whisper in their ears, its shadow a continuous dance in their eyes. Within the walls of the whispering house, Mr. Ainsworth continued his dance with the shadows, his being intertwined with the essence of the house, his soul, a vessel for the whispers of the unknown. The shadows painted unseen worlds on the walls. The whispers sang unheard symphonies in the air, his being and the house becoming one, a singular entity of shadows and whispers. Each whisper heard added a new layer to the unseen tapestry. Each shadow seen wove a new thread in the fabric of the unknown, the house becoming a living representation of the unseen and unheard. Its essence a keeper of the shadows, its being a guardian of the whispers. In the shadowed embrace of Sequoia Street, the illuminating golden glow of streetlights felt distant. The whispers of the leaves felt estranged, narrating tales that were not of joy, but of forlorn mysteries. The house at the end seemed to exist in a different realm, its form a beacon of otherworldly whispers and unseen dances. Within this whispering realm resided Mr. Ainsworth, a being submerged in the shadows of esoteric knowledge, ensnared by the whispers of the unseen. His mind wandered through forbidden scripts and unseen illustrations, each word a labyrinth leading to forbidden realms, every image a window to untold mysteries. The secluded sanctum he inhabited seemed to breathe with his pursuits, shadows growing denser, whispers more coherent, reflecting the mysterious realms he explored. It was as though an unseen, malevolent entity was becoming intertwined with his essence, and through him, marking its presence within the walls, whispering its ancient tales, casting its ominous shadows. Every incantation murmured by Ainsworth seemed to vibrate the very air around. Each shadowed ritual seemed to paint the unseen reality over the scene, converting the house into a tapestry of silent, haunted symphonies and invisible, sinister dances. The invisible energies coursed around him, whispering secrets of ancient times, revealing images of forbidden worlds. It was a dance, a harmonious synchronization of Ainsworth and the entity, shadows intertwining, whispers merging, unseen realms becoming almost visible, almost tangible. His existence became a symphony of unseen whispers and untold shadows. With every whisper echoed, a piece of him intertwined with the entity. With every shadow danced, a piece of the entity intertwined with him. The house, under the silent tutelage of the entity through Ainsworth, became a vessel, a silent observer, learning and absorbing the whispers and shadows of unknown realms. In the heart of the city where skyscrapers clawed at the heavens, there dwelt Eli Turner. His existence a stark contrast to the opulence that towered above him. His abode, an apartment as cramped as it was barren, mirrored the desolation that had crept into his life. Once a burgeoning freelance graphic designer, Eli had painted dreams onto digital canvases. But now, his screen sat dormant, the pixels no longer alight with promise. His finances, a casualty of relentless misfortune, lay in tatters, the remnants of a once thriving career now just whispers of digits in an overdrawn account. The cruel departure of his partner had left an echoing void, the absence of her laughter a haunting refrain amidst the silence of his solitary confinement. The looming threat of homelessness cast a long shadow over him, a relentless specter at the banquet of his woes. Eli's nightly sojourns through the city had become a pilgrimage of sorts, a search for a sign, for some semblance of hope. The streets, bathed in the neon glow of progress, seemed to sneer at his plight, the cacophony of urban life a constant reminder of his isolation. It was on one such evening, as a tempest threatened to break the city's proud stance, that Eli's path veered into the unknown. The rain, indifferent to his sodden clothes, guided him to an alcove where the modern world seemed to have loosened its grip. Nestled between the glossy facades of New Age establishments was the bookstore, an anachronism, its existence almost an act of defiance against the march of time. The sign above the door creaked on its hinges, the words, "Tomes and Tribulations," barely legible under the layers of peeling paint. A bell chimed as he stepped over the threshold, the sound a clarion call to the mysteries that lay within. The air was thick with the musk of aged paper and leather, a fragrance that stirred something primal within Eli's chest. Books of every conceivable genre stood shoulder to shoulder, their spines a mosaic of faded gold lettering and cracked leather. Eli's fingers trailed across them, the tactile sensation a balm to his frayed nerves. In the furthest recess of the store, where the light struggled to penetrate the gloom, Eli's gaze landed upon a particular tome. It was an aberration amidst the order, its cover devoid of title or authorship. The material was unfamiliar to the touch, cold and slightly yielding, as if it were made of a substance not wholly of this world. The symbols on the cover seemed to pulsate with an inner light, their design foreign, yet inexplicably familiar. They beckoned to him, a siren song that seduced his rational mind. And as the storm outside raged with increasing ferocity, Eli found himself opening the book, the creak of its spine like the lament of a forgotten spirit. The pages were yellowed with age, the edges brittle to the touch. But it was the script that drew him in. A language that twisted the tongue and defied comprehension, yet he found himself understanding it as if it were etched into the very marrow of his bones. In the center of the page, a contract awaited, the terms of the agreement inscribed with an elegance that belied its sinister promise. And there, at the bottom, a space for a signature, a void that seemed to call out to him, a whisper in the recesses of his mind urging him to claim a destiny unforetold. With the storm's crescendo as his witness, Eli grasped the pen provided as though compelled by forces beyond the veil of reality. His name, etched onto the parchment, seemed to burn with an unseen flame, the ink seeping into the page like dark blood into parched soil. With the final flourish of his name, the tome snapped shut, as if satisfied with the transaction it had brokered. Eli stood there, his hand still poised above the page, the gravity of his act a growing weight upon his consciousness. A strange lightheadedness took hold, the room spinning, and he could swear that for a moment the books whispered amongst themselves in hushed, sibilant tones. A cold draft swept through the shop, sending papers flying like startled birds. Eli's gaze was drawn to the window where the world outside had taken on a spectral quality. The city's lights bled into one another, the edges of reality smudged beneath the downpour. A part of him, perhaps the part still clinging to the rational world, begged him to chalk it up to an overactive imagination, fueled by the stress that had long been his constant companion. But then, the presence made itself known. At first, it was but a mere shifting in the air, a coalescence of shadows pooling together in the far corner of the room. Eli's heart lurched, a primal fear seizing him as he watched the darkness take on form, growing denser until it stood as a figure cloaked in the absence of light. The figure stepped forward, the darkness clinging to it like a shroud. Where its feet should have made contact with the worn wooden floor, there was no sound. No proof of its existence save for the oppressive energy that filled the room. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the creature, the demon, spoke. Eli's mind reeled. His initial skepticism crumbled as the entity before him radiated a force he could neither deny nor comprehend. This was no trick of the light, no figment of a distressed mind. This was real as the chill that seeped into his bones and the fear that constricted his chest. "What have I done?" he asked himself.
"You have sought refuge from your mortal afflictions,"
the demon replied, its form rippling like a heat mirage.
"In return, you shall serve the depths."
The room seemed to darken with the demon's every word, the candles extinguishing one by one until only a single flame remained, casting a lone, dancing shadow upon the demon's indistinct features. Eli could feel the contract's power within him now, a searing brand upon his very essence. He wanted to protest, to claim ignorance, to recoil from the fate he'd so blindly invited. But the words died in his throat, smothered by the sudden realization of the inescapable truth that wrapped around him tighter than any shroud. He had sought an escape from one nightmare, only to awaken in another, more terrible reality. And with that grim understanding, Eli Turner, once a humble artisan of digital realms, stepped into the gloom of his new existence, the demon's debt collector. In the throes of that revelation, the world as Eli knew it ceased to exist. His senses, once bound by the laws of nature, now transcended beyond. As the final candle extinguished, he expected darkness, but what he saw was the night alive with hues of an otherworldly spectrum. The very essence of life, the auras of beings, and the residue of souls clung to the atmosphere like auroral mists. He stumbled out of the bookstore, the chime of the doorbell sounding distant, a relic of a reality he had departed. The streets, slick with the weeping skies, reflected not just the neon rebellion of the city lights, but also spectral traces of energies unknown to the uninitiated eye. The denizens of the night, oblivious to the transformation of one of their own, passed by him, their lives a transparent tapestry of emotions and thoughts visible to Eli's newfound perception. He saw their fears, their joys, their pain, and their desires, all radiating from them like heat from pavement kissed by the summer sun. As he meandered through the alleys and boulevards of the city that had once been his canvas, Eli found himself at the precipice of despair. His heart, heavy with the knowledge of his newfound servitude, beat a dirge of resignation. How could he reconcile his existence with this infernal burden thrust upon him? It was then that Asmodeus chose to appear once more, his form less nebulous now, more defined. A connoisseur of souls, an aristocrat of the nether. He moved with a grace that was unsettling, his steps silent upon the wet cobblestone. Eli's eyes, once keen for color and form, now discerned the spectral threads that laced the city, a network of obligations, of debts unpaid, of destinies intertwined with entities unseen. He felt a pull, an instinctual tug towards these threads, each one a story, a life, a soul that beckoned. Under the shroud of an uncaring moon, Eli learned the nature of his new existence. He was to be the eyes of the abyss in the mortal world, the hand that would reclaim what was owed. His life, once dedicated to creating, was now repurposed for reclamation. Asmodeus faded into the shadows once more, leaving Eli to grapple with his fate. The city, this vast canvas of souls, was now his hunting ground, and hunt he must, for within him burned the undeniable truth that the pact was sealed, and his duty was irrevocable. In the silence that followed, Eli knew that the coming days would test the very limits of his humanity. He could feel the first assignment stirring in the ether, a call that would not be denied. The life he knew was over, and the path before him was fraught with shadows and whispers, a path that would lead him through the very thresholds of horror and beyond. The world that greeted Eli at the dawn of his first full day as the demon's debt collector was one draped in a veil of twilight half-truths and whispered secrets. The sun itself seemed a mere apparition, its rays filtered through a prismatic lens that revealed the hidden machinations of the spirit world overlaying the physical one. As he walked the streets, his every step was haunted by the awareness of his unholy mission. Eli could see the spectral chains that tethered the indebted to their otherworldly patrons, ethereal links that writhed and pulsed with a malignant energy. With each sighting, a piece of the puzzle fell into place. He was seeing the world not as it appeared, but as it truly was, a market of souls bartered in the shadows. The demon's introduction had been a shock, but the full weight of the contract's terms was a crushing burden. To harvest souls, to be the arbiter of some infernal justice, it was a role Eli recoiled from in the core of his being. Yet, the alternative was a fate too harrowing to contemplate. His own soul cast into the abyss, a currency for the damned. He sought refuge in his apartment, the familiar walls now seeming alien to him. Eli's hands shook as he poured himself a drink, the liquid amber a temporary solace from the gnawing dread. He caught his reflection in the window pane, a man marked by the other world, a stranger to himself. As the day bled into evening, Eli's reluctance was slowly eroded by the spectral phenomena that refused to be ignored. Whispers emanated from the corners of his rooms, and shadows coalesced into forms that were gone when he dared to look directly at them. It was clear the demon's world would not allow him to forget his obligation, to ignore the contract he had so foolishly signed. A reluctant acceptance. It was all he could muster. Resignation led him to open the ancient tome once more, its pages flipping of their own accord to reveal the ledger within, a catalog of names and the debts that bound them. Eli's task was set, his purpose clear. He could no longer afford the luxury of disbelief or the comfort of ignorance. He was the link between worlds, an agent of collection for debts owed to entities whose very existence defied understanding. It was with this somber acknowledgement that Eli closed the book and prepared himself for the road ahead. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to the spaces between, to the darkness that now guided his hand. The following days were a blur of shadows and whispers, of truths half glimpsed in the corner of Eli's eye. He found himself attuned to the ebb and flow of the otherworldly, the cadence of the hidden realm that now governed his existence. With a sense of detachment, he watched as his human connections unraveled, the ties to his former life fraying like threads in a moth-eaten cloth. Friends and acquaintances became distant echoes, their concerns and joys as remote to him as the stars in the firmament. His work, once a source of pride and fulfillment, lay forgotten. His tools, the stylus, the keyboard, the mouse, were untouched, gathering dust. In their place, the tome became his constant companion, its presence a constant reminder of the pact that bound him. Eli's transformation was not merely spiritual. His countenance began to bear the marks of his nocturnal pursuits, his eyes hollows of darkness that spoke of sleepless nights spent in pursuit of the damned. His skin took on a pallor that spoke of the grave, and when he moved, it was with a grace that was unsettling, too fluid, too silent, a mimicry of the living, a rift from normalcy. That was his reality now. He was a creature of the threshold, belonging neither to the light of day nor the dark of night. The city, with its ceaseless pulse and thrum, seemed to him a distant memory, a song whose melody he could no longer recall. It was on a night when the moon hung low, swollen and tinged with red, that Eli received his first assignment. The name was whispered to him not by the demon, but by the very shadows that had become his kin. The name of a soul whose time had come. The mark was a magnate, a man whose empire was built on suffering and sin. His soul, blackened by years of corruption and moral decay, was ripe for the taking. Eli could feel the weight of the man's transgressions in the air, a miasma that clung to the city's underbelly. Asmodeus's instructions were clear. The soul was to be collected, its debt to be paid in full. There would be no mercy, no reprieve. Eli understood the gravity of his task. It was not merely a soul he was to collect, but a message he was to deliver, a declaration of the demon's power and reach. Eli set out into the night, the ledger's pages fluttering in his mind, the name of his quarry burning in his thoughts. The magnate's home was a fortress of opulence, a testament to his earthly power. But Eli knew that behind the gates and the guards, the man was as vulnerable as any other when it came to the debts of the soul. The city watched, its breath held in anticipation, as the demon's debt collector stepped forth to claim what was due. It was the beginning of a saga that would unfold in the hushed tones of those who dared to speak of it, a tale that would leave its mark on the fabric of the city's legends. In the shadows of the world, where the lines between life and death blur, Eli's story was just beginning. A narrative woven from the darkest threads of the human tapestry. A story that would chill the heart and haunt the mind long after the last word was whispered.